how can Africa take command of its destiny by mobilizing its potential? A lot of people have tried to answer this question in different ways. Some say we have to forget the past and move ahead. Some say it's by continuing with what we have been doing, practicing Western democracy. Some say we have to start from the beginning and jettison everything that has been there before. Some say we have to go back to the roots. Some say it is by mental emancipation that Africans are mentally enslaved. What do you say? Today we have gathered a lot of experts, those from Africa and beyond Africa, to come and talk about this. And our program is made very easy. First of all, we have the organizers of this conference who will make some keynote address. Sekate Francis, who is here with me. And then Cees will make another keynote address. And later we are going to listen to the seed speech from Dr. Glenn's. It is the speech that we are expected to listen very clearly and think very deeply, because he really did not pull a punch. And then after that, we have speakers from Nigeria who will talk about environmental issues. And we have the young Kenyan environmentalist. The last speech we have reserved for Professor Lumumba, P.L.O. Lumumba. And his job is to articulate all the ideas that have been going and pushing us and giving us a way forward for Africa. We also have made room to allow some people to make some interventions, 5 minutes interventions, and then ask some questions. But within this speech, we are also going to make sure that we don't make it boring. After the first speaker, we have to have some moment of exchange between the main speaker and the audience. And when I say audience, it's not only the young people that have joined us today in this conference, but we have to bear in mind that this is principally an international virtual conference. And all those who have logged in from all over the place, all over the world, will make sure that those who want to speak, that have been given time to speak, will be allotted some time to speak. Now, after talking, I'm going to hand over the microphone to Francis Sekate. Francis Sekate is one of the brain behind this conference. Actually, he is a mover and shaker. I keep telling him that if he succeeded in managing me, he can manage anybody. For him to have come up with this kind of conference. And it's just from sharing war stories, exchanging some ideas. Francis mobilized a lot of experts. He even really shocked and surprised me. And he is here. I don't want to take the words from his mouth. He will talk a little bit about himself, and at the same time, tell us about how this conference started. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Reverend Father Ted, for that wonderful introduction. I'm happy that we have reached this day, which you have been longing. I will, of course, he has introduced I'm Francis Sekate. I've been working with him on this and the rest of the team to come to this conference. So I will start by greeting everybody here who are present in this hall, and everyone around Africa in particular and the rest of the world. So when Change Africa for Good If you are seeing behind some of the organizers of this conference, the non-profit organization is Change Africa for Good and the Rescue Our Future Foundation. So when Change Africa for Good joined forces with Rescue Our Future Foundation, it set a stage for a meeting to discuss local and global concerns of humanity. So this is why the overlapping goals between Change Africa for Good and the Rescue Our Future Foundation gave rise to this wonderful conference. How can Africa take command of its destiny by mobilizing its potential? So I welcome everyone who have joined this wonderful conference. Change Africa for Good was born out of the idea that for any local community to thrive, the key is development, which always comes from within. Development, too often we have witnessed the damage caused by societies importing development from outside. Development cannot be imported. It cannot be imparted. Development is always comes from within. Development can be triggered, it can be encouraged, strengthened, but can never be imported from outside. Okay, societies can benefit from the achievements and the models from other places that fit its reality, but it can't import development from outside. So one simply cannot develop the other. So among the many strategies to boost development in Africa, Change Africa for Good realized that it is only empowering communities. This is the only way that communities can understand their problems and come up with their local solutions. And that is why, and we realized that through volunteering, committed volunteers can do such a great job to help communities realize their initiatives. So that is why Change Africa for Good came up with a volunteering model to help local NGOs across East Africa help them, empower them by recruiting and selecting skilled volunteers who are skilled and really with a very good attitude to help local communities understand their problems and come up with their local solutions. So the goal of Change Africa for Good is every community in Africa not only survive, but thrive in a continent full of opportunities. This resonates well with the conclusion of the book Quest to Rescue Our Future, which was written with, by one of our colleagues. He is one of the speakers of in this conference. So the conclusion of the book is humanity must pool its moral reserves to respond to existential threats that endanger our stay on Earth. The shared ideas that development is the mobilization of one's potential to respond to challenges posed by nature and the habitat and history, to realize the sustainable project with an internal command, was the reason why Change Africa for Good proposed the organization of this virtual conference to discuss the mobilization of Africa's potential to take command of its destiny. This synergetic vibration between the cause of Africa and the destiny of humanity has attracted many different organizations across Africa and beyond. As Father Ted has told you, we have been in collaboration with a lot of people, individuals and organizations who had this and said, no, we have to come in and participate to make sure this conference goes on well. So in order to bring together the best ideas, it is an open forum for discussion and dialogue in the spirit of placing Africa in the driving seat. Africa no longer have to be behind. We have to be in front, take the steering, and drive ourselves to the best way we want. So in the spirit of securing Africa's future, the conference has set the stage for critical minds in Africa to join forces in realizing the conference. So I invite you to translate hope into action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francis Sekate. Part of the idea that gave birth to this conference today is a key organization, and that is Rescue Our Future Foundation. The president of this foundation is the person that is going to speak next. His name is Cees Hamelink. Let me connect the dots for you. The speaker, the key speech, is by Dr. Glenn. Cees is like an intellectual father to Dr. Glenn. And Dr. Glenn's key book is Rescue Our Future, Quest to Rescue Our Future. And this book led to this organization, and the president of this organization, Mr. Cees Hamelink. Unfortunately, just some few days to the conference, he had to be hospitalized. But he has finished the operation, he's recovering. We have his presentation in video. Please, technical side, can you help us and give us the video of Cees Hamelink?
What a great pleasure to speak at the opening of this wonderful conference on the destiny of Africa. And an honor as president of the Rescue Our Future Foundation to be part of this event. For me, it's also personally very emotional because Africa is my favorite continent where I have lived and worked. And if someone makes me up in the middle of the night and says, "Where do you want to travel next?" I would immediately say, my suitcases are always ready for my African brothers and sisters. This continent has suffered beyond comprehension of external and internal colonial masters. And if you look at the reality of today, it seems as if the pillage, the exploitation, the extraction just continues. Recently, a young student asked me, "But professor, what do you think about post-colonialism?" And I said, "Post? Did it ever stop? It just continues, doesn't it?" My good friend Glenn Sankatsing will speak a little later. He is the author of this marvelous book on the quest to rescue our future. And he speaks in this book on the moral reserves of humanity. Now, the colonial masters can take away material reserves, and they did. But they cannot master the moral reserves. The African moral reserves are in its wisdom, in its humor, in its religion, and more than anything else, they are in the African soul. And it is the African soul that gives the resilience to create a new future for this continent. I wish all of us an inspiring, productive, and very soulful conference.
Please, let us give him a round of applause in absentia. And for your information, actually he has a broad experience and has crisscrossed this universe. In his work, he has been in Canada, Denmark, Ethiopia, France, Germany, Hong Kong, and especially Africa, Jamaica, Kenya. He has been in Kenya and has worked as a scholar for many years. Now is the time for the main document, the key paper, the key document. And I will tell you to brace yourselves. Because in Spanish they say, no se salta un valle por saltar brincos. You don't jump a valley or a gully by little jumps. Glenn's Sankasting did a thorough analysis that spans a lot of years of research on the problem of Africa. If you are listening to him, listen very thoroughly, because every statement has a lot of pages and volumes behind it. He keeps analyzing, going deep into the cause or the roots of the problems of Africa. He didn't leave he didn't leave even academia. So, ladies and gentlemen, permit me to now invite Glenn Sankasting to give us the seed paper of this conference. Thank you very much. Glenn, you are welcome.
Okay, thank you, Father Tat. Thank you, Francis. Good afternoon, Africa. Good afternoon, Asia, from a sunny morning here in the Caribbean. Welcome to this conference that will discuss how to take Africa from the backseat of history to the steering wheel of its own future. As a cosmopolitan, a citizen of the world whose only allegiance is humanity, I'm grateful to be part of this conference in the birthplace of humanity. Born on a sugarcane plantation in colonial Suriname that has brought together Asia, Africa, and the Americas, I was confronted at birth with the common struggle and the common destiny of humanity. Since my hometown is planet Earth, allow me to speak to you at this conference in deep solidarity with Africa. I especially welcome the youth who will populate the future.
Madagascar.
Okay, somebody came in. At your age, as a Caribbean student in Europe, we took to the streets in the cold winter days to demonstrate against apartheid in South Africa with the slogan, "This madness in Africa must stop now." Today, half a century later, we must begin this conference with the same words, as if history had forgotten to move forward. Apartheid has been overthrown, but its spirit and colonial practices are more alive and harmful than ever. Things have become bad, but what is most worrisome is that a young African, not yet born, will stand up after 50 years to say to the world, "This madness in Africa must end, unless we stop the madness now." That is the reason for this conference, which is different from the high-profile summits where our politicians and disconnected elites meet and never stop talking about us without us. They do not fear our pain when they sacrifice the fate of Africa for economic growth that destroys our environment and brings violence and war that serve no African purpose. But what makes this conference different from the many failed attempts to liberate Africa? Are we not just trying to reinvent the wheel? The short answer is that the wheel of liberation of Africa is yet to be invented. Historically, Africa was forced to grow from someone else's genetic codes rather than from its own potential in balance with the environment. A history of endless disruption, social collapse, economic crisis, political polarization, and war stands out as a monument of colonial and imperialist destruction in every corner of Africa. To understand the magnitude of what has happened, we do not have to read difficult books because colonialism can be summed up in 5 words. The guest became the host. An intruder enters your house and tells you, "You are my guest. Your house is mine, your land is mine, your resources are mine, and you are mine." This is the autobiographical story of colonialism, neocolonialism, imperialism, and the continued appropriation of Africa's wealth that undermines its ability to move forward. Yet, many of our policymakers, experts, and African universities still suggest we should add some nuance because beyond regrettable violence, they had the intent to civilize, westernize, modernize, and develop Africa. You can only civilize a barbarian, otherwise there is nothing to civilize. The civilizing mission was to clone the West in other societies, to incorporate them into the backseat of the project for economic gain of the West. Since their foreign implants needed empty lands and blank minds, they abolished our history and marginalized our vibrant culture into dead folklore. To civilize was to domesticate. After they had domesticated us, they westernized us with their mantra. What was good for the West is best for the rest. The models they brought were not adapted to our reality, but our reality was modified to accommodate their models. This is not just a superiority claim to be better than us, because their achievements were also better for us and could be imposed on us with violence if necessary. Civilization and westernization have suspended our social evolution, discontinued our heritage, banished our gods, and broken our communitarian Ubuntu solidarity. They have even targeted our minds, forbidding us to use the language we need to express our feelings and to talk to the trees in the forest. So rather than continuing the long process of social evolution inherited from our ancestors, the colonial and imperialist plan of domination was to globalize us into extinction, socially, culturally, spiritually, economically. The history of the last 500 years is the globalization of the local experience of the West, which has turned other societies into remote controlled trailer societies without engines and steering wheel, like trailers dangling from the back of trucks. There is no such thing as a global village. One village went global, uprooting other communities while inserting its own image on other latitudes. The global mission of the West was not to impart, but to collect. When the colonies started to become independent, colonialism changed its story to developing backward countries by offering them their achievements to lift them up to Western standard. But if they had shared that technology with our countries with abundant natural resources and inexpensive labor, they would no longer be able to compete with us in the world market. Since capitalism is not a charitable institution, the story of bringing development to distant competitors in a colonial environment sounds very dubious. All models of development brought from the outside have failed because development is not transferable, even as a generous gift. You cannot bring development, it is always from within. You can give a mango seed sunlight, water, and fertilizer to let it grow into a strong mango tree, but it will never become an apple tree. You cannot grow potatoes, potatoes grow themselves. Development is the mobilization of one's own potential in response to the challenges posed by nature and history to realize a sustainable project with an internal command center. This sounds like the title of our conference. How can Africa take command of its destiny by mobilizing its potential? The so-called development that they have brought has been disastrous for Africa. Instead of supporting Africa towards maturity, it was the opposite of development. It was envelopment, like wrapping up in an envelope, which included us in their project for economic gain. Development is from the inside and brings life and prosperity. Envelopment shapes us from the outside and brings discontinuity, destruction, and death. Now you understand why the so-called development theories didn't work. We can now tell Walter Rodney, who wrote the classic work on African underdevelopment, that Europe underdeveloped Africa through envelopment. But here we see the beauty of evolution. Envelopment always triggers development. If you cut down a tree, it will grow new shoots. Limbo dance was not born in Africa or the Caribbean. The joy of limbo was created on slave ships where space was small and chains were short by people on their journey into centuries of hereditary slavery. This is the force and the power of development because it is linked to the driving force of evolution, which is life always seeks more life. Dominant system can oppress people to the brink of death and deprive them of the tools of survival, but life and culture always find a way. This dynamic interaction between development and envelopment is a powerful tool to explain history and to understand our social evolution, much more powerful than all the concepts invented by traditional social science, because I've worked with them. It explains how the chanting of sorrows in cotton fields gave us the Mississippi Delta blues, and why the people of Trinidad did not throw the colonial oil barrels in the Caribbean Sea, but crafted them carefully for their beautiful steel band music. These examples point to the deep underlying process in evolution that envelopment always triggers new development. This is not always successful. Decolonizations open the door to recolonization when the national liberation movement adopted the Western nation state, Western democracy, and Western philosophy and science as the starting point to build the so-called post-colonial society. This reminds me of one of the worst fiction books I've ever read, which is Philosophy of History by the famous Western philosopher Hegel. Hegel tells us that history traveled from the east to the west, from Asia as the childhood to Europe as the end of history. Hegel's basic idea that Europe is the future face of all other nations is the Eurocentric backbone of Western philosophy, science, and ideology, including Karl Marx, who tells us that the more developed country shows the less developed countries the image of its own future. For Hegel, the guru of European philosophy, all other nations are destined to become like Europe one day. This violates the fundamental evolutionary principle that adaptation to different environments leads to diversity. It is like saying that all the trees of the world are destined to become an oak tree someday. The African soul and community never quite trusted the fable of civilization, but our political elites and westernized intellectuals adopted Western models and ideology as the key assets for decolonization. Millions of people have died in fanatical defense of capitalist and communist ideologies that have nothing to do with our own reality. Capitalism did not emerge anywhere in Africa. It was delivered as the cargo of a sailing ship. There is no international capitalism. Only globalized Western capitalism, which has successfully colonized the world. The anti-colonial struggle implicitly accepted Western civilization as the vanguard of human evolution and the only ticket to world history. Africa sought liberation in the system responsible for its colonization. The liberation project failed because it tried to reform hell while the devil was bringing more coal. The independence project was the work of westernized minds who copied the Western model without testing it first. Part of the painful dilemma of decolonization was, still is, that the borders of the state they tried to liberate were the scars of colonialism created with colonial violence across tribal lands. The winner-takes-all democracy, one of the models, guarantees majority rule by the largest tribe at the expense of the smaller tribes, which leads to civil war with mathematical precision. Elections are a beauty contest for power that mobilizes people to exclude them later. In an act of political suicide, people become powerless by outsourcing all their power when they drop the ballot in box to elites who get the mandate to govern without them. Power not through bullet, ballot, or wallet, but echoing the voice of the people is the only viable way to achieve true democracy and trigger development. Democracy is not about telling lies, not even about telling the truth. It is about listening to the heartbeat of the people. This urges Africa to reinvent an Ubuntu-based democracy with representatives who obey the people rather than allowing disconnected elites to hijack their future. Without that, it will be difficult to achieve a united Africa with development, stability, and peace. A divided Africa fights for crumbs. A united Africa is the owner of the bakery. African universities must still cut the Western umbilical cord and stop copying models and entire branches of science that have no validity in Africa. What is the point of accepting cultural anthropology, the daughter of colonialism, which treats our lives and our daily behavior as exotic objects of study? Why should Africa accept modern economics, which has become the doctrine of capitalism to optimize markets and maximize profit? Why should Africa embrace capitalism, which processes nature into bank accounts and destroys our environment with impunity? Why should Africa, with its ties to Mother Earth, accept an economic system for which the only beauty of nature is its monetary value? Why should societies that invented Ubuntu embrace the warlike concept of competition, the pillar of Western economics, whose scientific formulas have no symbol for solidarity and cooperation? African universities can be and have been powerful platform for critical debate on Africa's liberation. But many still behave like fan clubs of foreign scientific centers that telepathically study Africa from afar. To become the bastions of development and crown jewels of critical thinking, many African universities need an urgent overhaul. Africa's struggle for liberation is part of a global struggle against all forms of envelopment and domination, not just by the West, which has pushed global injustice to extreme brutality. Long before Europe came out of the caves, domination had already been Chinese, Mongol, Aztec, Ottoman, and African. Soon it became the fourfold domination which now threatens our stay on Earth, which is domination of nature that caused the environmental crisis, the domination of human being that led to global envelopment, the domination of culture that caused this fundamentalist clash, and domination of the mind that has drowned many into mental slavery. Domination has nothing to do with the color of the skin, but with the evil of the mind. As descendants of the same African ancestors, we are a global extended family, and race is a terrible lie. To survive our journey through the world, we have had to adapt to geography, climate, sun, and cold, which affected the pigmentation of the skin, but not the color of the heart. Therefore, we must eliminate all forms of envelopment by racism, sexism, supremacy, oppression, and injustice, and overcome domination by choosing development in a global solidarity across national, ethnic, gender, and religious divides. Africa knows its problem. It has felt them for centuries. Africa knows its future. It is the future it aspires to. It has seen it 1,000 times in its dreams. The real challenge we face is in the first word of this conference, how, which invites us to focus on concrete actions and strategies, because action is the best prediction. The failure of African liberation has taught us that powerful systems of domination will never provide solutions to the dominated. The solution is from outside the system of envelopment, what you can call an extra systemic development project of the people. We must believe in evolution and leave behind the obsession of revolution that you always must destroy before you can build. Instead of fighting the weeds, we should plant trees that will deprive them of sunlight and nutrients. If we nurture good, it will eventually overcome evil. Tested by the wheel of time, evolution is the best revolution. The best grip on our destiny is not our grip on the gun, but our grip on the steering wheel. To bring Africa to a safe haven, we must not bow when we face inescapable odds, because it does not matter whether the water is cold or hot if we have to cross the river anyway. We must also reject the suggestion that it is wise to be pragmatic. A pragmatic slave is an eternal slave. We will not choose the lesser of two evils if none can guarantee survival. The coldest place in hell is not an acceptable option for us. Fortunately, evolution is on our side with this beautiful law that in the face of death or extinction, all creatures, species, and people become creative in finding survival options. I cannot wait to hear the powerful voices at this conference of our speakers like Nnimmo, Bassey, Vanessa Sekate, and P.L.O. Lumumba, but also the valuable contributions of our participants who have come here for a specific purpose. Let me therefore conclude with some final thoughts. Africa must restore the natural flow of its energy to build a better society. What Africa wants is to survive, to grow, to flourish, to bear fruit, and to overcome death by reproduction. The opposite had happened to Africa. The vocation of apartheid was to turn the cradle of humanity into the graveyard of humanity. Africa's vocation is to turn hope, justice, and Ubuntu solidarity into printed life. The force that can rescue the continent, Africa's moral reserves, though long marginalized, will never be enslaved or silenced. Now that it has begun to speak, let us make this conference a wake-up call. Africa is facing many tasks, challenges, and hurdles, but all converge on one goal: to turn a rich continent into a rich continent. This does not sound out of reach, but as easy as it may seem, as difficult as it may be, we need courage, perseverance, unity, solidarity, and creativity, because colonialism is like a mutating virus that quickly transforms to adapt to changing circumstances. But all colonial mutations, from colonialism to neo-colonialism to modern globalization, have one thing in common that did not change in centuries. They always offer us two choices, no more, no less, just two options. You can live on your knees, or you can die on your feet. From the painful experiences of our heroic freedom fighters, Africa has learned the lesson and can now draw the right conclusion. Africa has its answer ready with this conference, which this conference adopts to mobilize its potential and take command of its destiny. This is Africa's final and non-negotiable answer. We will live on our feet to walk towards our own destiny. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Glenn. It was everything we expected.
I'm ready for that.
That's a punch. That was a punch you threw. So then, I think, like we promised, we are going to have some 5 minutes of engagement. I will take questions, those who have questions for Glenn. You heard everything he said. You may have had some concepts. He talks about envelopment and development. You know, we talk about sustainable development. That man there says that is a tautology. You are just repeating yourself. Development of itself is something that starts from inside and comes outside. It's always sustainable. Development is always sustainable. But what has happened rather is envelopment. Africa has been put inside an envelope and bottled. So then, he talks again about revolution and evolution. You know, usually young people get so much annoyed when they hear these things and they're filled with energy. Glenn tells you that evolution is the answer. Allow the forces itself to galvanize. Because when you plant a tree, a big tree, when it starts growing, those shrubs, if they are suffocated of sun, they just die off. So why must you destroy? Instead of just planting on a solid foundation and going forward. Sometimes we say we have to be pragmatic. I don't want to overstate this. I don't know how many people who want to ask questions. There are a lot online. I don't know, technical person, if somebody wants to ask question, then the person can do by raising up his hand. All right, let us start from here. I think somebody here wants to ask question, and that is Biagarazo Innocent. He works with me here in the center. Please, you're welcome. If you want, you can come up here. You ask your question, we take another question, then we continue from there.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Innocent Biagarazo. I work with John P.L.O, the Second Justice and Peace Center. Glenn touched on something that I love so much. He touched on something to do with Ubuntu. But Ubuntu is something that is so African. And if you have studied Ubuntu extensively, you'll understand how important it is. Ubuntu covers everything, covers development, covers our economic life, the social, in fact, all spheres of life. But what is very unfortunate is that despite, the beauty of Ubuntu, its capacity to change lives, especially the lives of Africans, it seems to be something that is treated, to be minor. Africans don't take it so seriously. Even, in the universities, even in other institutions, Ubuntu is not so much preached the way it's supposed to be preached. And yet, it's actually something very rich that if we carry forward, it's going to be something that is very, very crucial, for the African mankind. So, my question to Glenn is that, despite the efforts that we have put, which other way, can we try to promote, and practice Ubuntu, try to instill it into our blood so that we don't let it die, because it's actually dying. So how can we, as Africans, capture Ubuntu, into our hearts and don't let it go away? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That is the question with respect to Ubuntu. Joshua, please, can you unmute your microphone and shoot your question?
Hello, hello. Thank you so much. My name is Joshua Eyaro. I'm tuning in from Kampala, and I'm really so happy that I joined this session. And being a young politician, I see there's a lot of disconnect between the elderly generation and the young people. You realize that, taking an example of Uganda, the people that are leading us today are people that have decided that they are going to serve their own interests, that even when it comes to the area of investment, they only care about the foreign investors. Young people are completely ignored. Local investors are not, they're not given any incentives in this country. And because of that, young people have decided that if it means for us to fight for our future, then we must get into politics. And I think that's one of the things that has driven me to join politics. And recently, in this concluded general election, I ran for member of parliament, and I realized and tested what it means joining politics in our current states. What happens is that when they see a young person who is so vibrant and is not scared of all these military confrontations, the next thing they do is offering you some financial incentives so that you quit. Personally, I was offered money on several occasions to quit the race, but I couldn't. But then I've seen so many young people who were given money and they gave up on the race. What this means is that the old generation that has control of the state resources are using this to suppress the young people who are going to be the next leaders of this country, the next leaders of Africa. And this is discouraging most of the young people even to participate in politics. So now my question becomes, how can young people now fight for their future? Because we feel so neglected. We feel like there's a disconnect between the old and the young. We've tried joining politics, but then the level of intimidation, the level of threats that you get, you find yourself almost quitting. So what should young people really do so that we can bridge that gap between the young and the old, so that in the end, when we inherit this continent, we need to inherit a continent that is stable, not inheriting a continent that is completely dead. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Joshua. And now, without wasting much time, Dr. Glenn, could you please react to those questions before I call in the next speaker, who I guess is waiting? I'll give the microphone, I yield the microphone to Dr. Glenn.
Thank you, Innocent, for your comments about Ubuntu. Ubuntu is so African, so deep in the soul of Africa, and why we don't see it in practice of today's Africa. That is basically what you say. And why is it so difficult to bring something to the fore that is deep within us? Well, this is the exact same problem of colonialism, of envelopment. Not only physically, we could not grow out of our own genes and our own potential, but also spiritually, also culturally. So Ubuntu was suppressed, but it is there. And once we realize that within the whole package of envelopment, that people from outside will determine our destiny, there is no solution, and we go for development. That is the oxygen that Ubuntu can get. If we don't do that, it will have no oxygen. It will be a nice prehistoric and historic characteristic of Africa, but it is more than that. It is a life stream of Africa. So you cannot just tell people, hey, go for Ubuntu, if the whole environment is the negation of Ubuntu, is oppression, is exploitation, is poverty. It will not work. So you should understand that while we mobilize the potential, Ubuntu will be a powerful tool to do so. So it's about development. Then Joshua, you make your point about the problem of the youth, and they want to change the society, but then they see politics and they get trapped in it, and they don't see solution or an exit. The problem is that, and it is also our politicians, because a lot of people go into politics with good intentions, but unfortunately, there is some kind of negative selection in politics, that those who have worse intentions, or not the best intentions, will survive easier than those with best intentions. So you have a negative natural selection in politics, that those who eventually stay in power are most of the time or often not the people who want to change the society and be with the people. Corruption is not an excess of democracy, it is the premium of democracy. That's how it works. It is my turn now. And even if I'm in the opposition, I respect you doing your thing for yourself because next time I will have to do the same. So again, we are talking about a system that was imposed that has no connection with the people. That's why I said we need to have a different kind of Ubuntu-based democracy. If we don't do that and we try to change the system from within, it will not work. It didn't work. So we're talking about a big overhaul. And that's what I mean by extra systemic. You have to break out of the system, not by breaking the system down or killing people, but by liberating your mind and looking for other options. The issue of mental slavery is a very, very serious one. Let me make one remark on that. You know, the real power of the West was not its economic power or military prowess. It was the power to define the concept. They defined civilization, and we believed it was virtue. They defined development, and we had no way to see it another way because we just copied until what I said. We see, wait a minute, something is wrong with this concept. They're cloning themselves. They're not civilizing us. So they define the concept for us, and our task is to unmask the definitional power where they dictate what should happen. So I warn you that dictionary is a very dangerous book because they define everything for us, whereas we have to redefine a lot. So that's my comment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Glenn. We have to do some adjustments. But before I talk about that, it is very interesting that a young man who is seeking for political post was in this forum and has something to present. Some people may not know it, but in the last encyclical of Pope Francis, he says something about politics that may have some people didn't notice. He said, politics is one of the highest forms of charity. Why? Because politics seeks the common good. We can never trash politics. We can never shun away from it. Somebody is already asking in the forum, but he has spoken so well. Where are the politicians? Where are the leaders? They should listen to this. Well, how do you make them come? So then, the next speaker in our conference now, we would like to make some adjustment and bring Vanessa in if she's there. And okay, we would like to bring Vanessa in. Okay, she's not there. I will take one or two more questions, then we before we bring in the next speaker. Any other questions? I will also check online. Have to do a lot of coordination. I wasn't expecting so much people to come in the physical presence, but we are happy you are here. Thank you very much. So if somebody could find out about Vanessa, perhaps she's having problem logging in. I know I checked with her as far back as yesterday. And we're also expecting Lumumba, who will be the last speaker today. Anybody with question among the audience, please come forward.
Thank you. My name is Mugabe Andrew. I'm a Ugandan. I happened to have volunteered with Change Africa for Good in 2016. But before, I volunteered in Nigeria in 2015. I just brought out that background because it's where I want to base myself. When Dr. Glenn was making his presentation, he said that, I quote him, "Development is mobilization of own potential." I think I agree with him. It is possible for Africa to develop herself if we use our own people, our own resources. I want to give this as an example. I happen to have worked with Change Africa for Good, as I had told you. I was assisting in monitoring and evaluation, and also in Nigeria, I was doing the same job. The biggest challenge we have in Africa is lack of cooperation. You might not look at lack of resources as a big issue, but to me, I looked at lack of cooperation. Africans, we are not united. I want to give an example. A small organization here in, by then, Change Africa for Good was in Karambi along Mitiana Road. We had limited resources, but we were able to work as a team. We were like 3 or 4 staff. Me, I was a volunteer, but there were like other 3 full-time staff. The impact we caused in society was so big compared to an organization that had a lot of money or any other resources. So it is possible, it can be done once we bring our heads together. I want to thank Dr. Glenn for his presentation. I'm a student of development studies from Makerere University. When he was presenting, my mind was flashbacking when I was studying development studies in Makerere. Whatever he was saying, I was flashbacking 20 years back when I was a student at Makerere. So I believe teamwork or cooperation can make a very big change in Africa. Lastly, he mentioned about that there is a need to overhaul African university system or education. I would to some extent disagree with him in a way that there are some courses or course units that are relevant to Africa. Not all is lost or not all is bad. I believe the biggest part of our education system can be changed, but not wholly or in totality. With those few remarks, thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that question. And again, online, I have noticed Mr. Peter Koroji wants to ask a question to Dr. Glenn. Is Peter still online? Please unmute your microphone and shoot.
Yes, Dr. Ted, I'm here. My names are Chidozie Peter Okoroji. I keyed in from Republic of Ireland. I'm a Biafran from the eastern part of Nigeria. And my question for Dr. Glenn is this. First, my reaction or my comment on his the lecture he delivered is that, just like Dr. Ted mentioned, every line of Dr. Glenn's speech was heavily loaded. Every line heavily loaded. That's one observation. Now, having listened to the speech delivered, you have identified so many issues with Africa. But then, another person has also mentioned the Ubuntu as a very unifying principle that will take Africa to a very great level. But I want to ask you, Dr. Glenn, where do you see Africa with regards to our mindset? Professor Lumumba, in various speeches he has made in the past over in Africa, had always made reference to René Descartes, who had always said that the greatest battle of all ages had always been the battle of the mind. And if we look closely, if we put this statement side by side with the Western expenditure on media like international media like CNN, BBC, ACF, and other world media, very few none come from Africa. Africans have not invested and do not invest in these areas. And so do you see the fundamental problem of Africa, I mean the solution first, in resetting our minds by making efforts to correct these conquests of our minds? Our minds are conquered on a daily basis and have always been conquered by the international media. They spend so much money giving us, shunning out a lot of things, and Africans take them in, and it's oppressed at the back of our mind, and that's how we see ourselves. The Western colonization, the neo-colonization, imperialism, they are not physical. They simply come through these avenues of the media, working on our minds, conquering our minds all the time. So do you see that as a fundamental start of resetting, of solving our problem? Apart from Ubuntu is fine, and unity in Africa and all other things are okay, but then where is the place of this particular statement made by René Descartes, that the greatest battle has always been the battle of the mind? The minds of Africans are conquered in various ways, various means. So do you see that as a base, a fundamental base of solution to this particular project we are doing now, we're looking at now, how to recapture our future, how to mobilize and take care of our future? Do you find this relevant in any way? That's my question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Glenn. I'm very happy, although by the stroke of events, we still have you, but we are very happy. We'd like to hear your response to those two questions. You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the questions. The first one is about the university. I was very clear on 2 points. There is a lot to be done at the university, but the university has done a lot, and it's a wonderful institution of our society. So it is not in any way meant that we should disregard the importance. The opposite is true. Because it is so important, we should make the university part of what this conference tries to do, to mobilize our potential. We should not just follow all kinds of impulses from outside. Even we can learn a lot from it. Let me give an example. The Western universities are very much obsessed with truth and knowledge. But the objective of science is not to discover the truth, because we all know that what we discover is not the truth, it's the best available guess for the time being, and tomorrow somebody will tell us, you are a nice guy, but it does not work like that. Like Einstein told Newton, that's no problem, because it works. It was the best available gas, and that's what animals need to live and survive, and that's what humans live to survive. But don't claim you have the truth and you can impose it on others. So we don't have to go for that mindset. The objective of science is not to discover the truth, but to reduce the degree of speculation so that you have a better chance to have success. And that's the power of our university. Once we know that, then we need to connect to action, to reality. It is not a theoretical thing, because we know that it is not the exact truth. There's a very nice statement that says, all the things that humanity discovered were errors. Some of those errors were useful and helped us to survive, and those who discovered them had a better chance to survive. That is Nietzsche. Nietzsche is saying that. Very interesting, which means that we know that what we say is not the truth, but it's the best available guess. So if the university takes that stance, it automatically brings us to deal with practical issues, because the only knowledge that counts is practical knowledge. It works, not because it is true, because it isn't. It will be changed afterward, but it works. So that's my point of that university role. So let me be clear, the university is important and we have to strengthen it. But we, as people from the university, I've been working on my life in university, we have to take that different mindset, and then and that brings us to the second point, the domination of the mind. I said there are four, I call them in my book, agonies of humanity. Domination of nature, culture, the fellow human, and mind. And you have to solve them. And the most important one of the four, and I agree with Peter, is the domination of the mind. If you can only dominate somebody if you dominate his mind. If there's a junkie, if people, these drugs addicts, you cannot dominate him. You can kill him, but he does not listen. You have no access to his mind, so you cannot do it. So you have to dominate his mind. If you don't have domination of the mind, you can have no domination. So that's why so much energy is put by all kinds of techniques with philosophy, with ideology, to dominate the mind of people. So the first step you cannot solve the ecological problem if you dominate the mind. So I agree. The first and most important one of those four agonies is to emancipate from mental slavery. And that means that we have to redefine, that we have to break out of a system, a very intelligent system. I give some examples how concepts are used, which limits our mind. If you really believe in civilization as only a very good thing, and a virtue, then you are dominated because it was not that. So we have to unmask development. Everybody looked at development something positive, but we just said it was the exact opposite what they presented. So I agree, the first step is how to liberate the mind. Let me give an example, because people say, yeah, that will take centuries or generations. You have a full educational system for hundreds of years, of tens of years. No, it can happen very easily. And I give a quick example, in historical examples is powerful. In Cuba, in the Cuban history, there was a planter who decided with Eastern season to organize, to imitate what Jesus did in the Last Supper. And he lined up 12 slaves and washed their feet. And these slaves looked at each other, these enslaved people, they looked at each other. And after a week, it was a very quiet plantation. After a week, there was a revolt, and they burned the plantation. And the Western historiography writes, this is a symptom of ingratitude. No, what happened is that the planter washed their feet, and these enslaved people look at each other and say, in front of his own God, he accepts that he's less than us. So this man is a tyrant. And within a week, they organized and they burned the plantation. So this planter made them aware in 5 minutes what 100 years of slavery didn't do, and the next probably would not do. So it is possible to let people get to that wait a minute moment. And it is our task to open the eyes of the people to do that. It not necessarily shall take 100 years, 10 years. It can be weeks and months and years. That's my comment.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I don't know whether we can take more questions, but then I will also give you a feedback from some of the questions people have been asking online. The issue, they say, is that the colonial masters have gone. We have our own politicians, and they are wreaking more havoc than the colonial masters, the colonizers. How do we change the politicians? I don't know. Any other question? We asked that one. Anybody has a question, please come forward. Just say your name and then you shoot your question. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Linda Amuge. My question is from Kampala, Uganda. My question is, how can Africans move from being dependent, because now our problem is dependence. Our mindset, the mindset that we have is being dependent on the Western people. That's why we are actually still under colonialism. How can we move from being just a dependent continent to a continent that can give solutions and be a resource and a source to the world's problems? That's how we can, I think we can move out. So that is actually my question.
Thank you very much. So Dr. Glenn, over to you to respond. Remember the connection about the politicians, those that we have fallen into their hands. Thank you.
Okay. A blame game will not help us. If you say, colonialism, that everything is not our fault, and you go on doing that and you don't do anything different, it will bring no solution. You have to look forward. History travels from the past to the future, and we are its footsteps. We make history. You cannot restore the past. Nostalgia takes the opposite road of evolution, which is future-oriented. So even if you are enveloped, you cut the tree will say, I'm going to cut tree, and will complain. No, the tree will just make new shoots because it wants to survive. That's what the tree does. And why should we don't do that? We have to have problems in our life and trauma and everything. But on ruins, you should not mourn, but you should build on ruins. That's the best thing you can do. So we have had this history, and if you have the right to blame, but that's not a solution. That is like a pre-exercise. Once you have blamed, okay, so what? So we have to create. We are the architect of the future if we want, or we will be the victims of the future if we want. So we have to make the diagnosis, but then we have to see how we continue. And that brings us to Linda's question. How do we get out of this? The question of Linda actually is, how can we mobilize our potential, which is the theme of this conference. We have potential. Nobody will say Africa has no potential. We have. But how you mobilize it? And mobilizing potential will be in direct relation to your own reality. You mobilize it to survive. Animals do that. They see a problem, they mobilize the potential to respond to the challenges. So the big issue is, how can we mobilize our potential? What is our potential? We know more or less. We have to make an inventory and see how. And one of the big potentials we have is the youth of Africa. Africa is a very young continent. This youth can be a big problem if they have no education, they have no work, they become criminal, they use drugs, all kinds of things can happen. But there's an enormous energy that when you create the conditions, even in small places, like Changing Africa for Good is doing, the organization, then you can mobilize the potential and people will understand, wait a minute, we cannot solve the problem of the village if we don't solve the problem of the country. So that will bring in politics. The problem of politics is a very important one, as Father Ted said. You cannot change the world without having power. But it is not power that you take as an elite. People should take power. And that's one interesting approach I met in studying Latin America and Central America, is an experiment to govern by obeying. That means that those who govern are not disconnected, but those who are governed force them to obey. We have to go for another system if we have this political system in place. And the colonial fathers are gone. but we didn't make much progress because we are in that colonial mindset. If we go for development to mobilize our potential, we have the starting point to address these problems. There are many of them, and that's why this conference wants to talk about it, how we mobilize. But that is the task to do. And once you start with that, new things will come up. It's like giving a small plant water and it grows into a big tree. But then you have to let it grow out of its own potential, out of its own genes. So I think there is a problem between what we have, a system, and what we are supposed to be and what is natural. And once you go for development, the balance can change. It will take time and energy. Okay.
All right, thank you very much. We are still waiting for the next speaker, which is Nnimmo, to come online. There has been some minor setback with respect to that. He's going to come online very soon. I can take one or two questions, but even before that, Glenn, I don't want to preempt Professor Lumumba, P.L.O. Lumumba, because I know he's going to touch so much on the issue of politics. But the fact still remains that when people hear beautiful ideas of what has to be done, then the next question is, what do we do next? And what is on ground is that Museveni is in charge of Uganda, then Buhari is in charge of Nigeria, Uhuru is in charge of Kenya. How do you move these stumbling blocks or these blocks of power? They can be obstructing or assisting to all this vision that we have. Some people come to say that actually when you remove politics, you have removed everything, because it is the moving block. It is what actually galvanizes people. It is how you start making change to happen. Dr. Glenn, please come again to our rescue. Thank you.
Okay, so we are touching a very interesting theme here, because it is about how can we turn the tide. Because, as I said, power is very important, not an issue. But the point is, who has the power? If the tyrant has the power, you have a problem. If the people have the power, you have a different situation. And the issue of politics in our society is a very tricky one. People think that on election day, the power in a country of people is at stake. But it's not fully true. There are a lot of powers. The most important powers in evolution are not discussed, are not voted about. The economic power, which is essential in the survival of humanity, of any species, is already pre-distributed. So we don't vote about political power because it's their property. And that's much more important than a lot of other powers. You don't vote about media power, about religious power. So a lot of power is not there. The part we call political power is only a fraction of power. And that is even captured by the other power, like the economic power. They are not content to have 80% of the real power of country, which is the economic power. They also want the political power. So the economic power, which is envelopment, moves in the political power. My point of power is the whole system of power is an envelopment power. It is annexing and incorporating. It is what I call a beauty contest for power. And that will bring no solution. If we leave that like that, it will go on forever. It has been going on for quite some time, and it will go on forever. So I have to think about a different way. And it is very sad to see how we copied systems from outside. Let me give an example. A lot of people talk about the nation state, which is the basis for our democracy. The nation state is a very tricky concept, because in Europe, the nations, which are the different ethnic and tribal groups, formed a state. So the state was a product of that. But we don't have nation states. We had the colonial state that was decreed. And then they tried to put people together who were within the lines that they draw. So we have state nations. The state was first. So it's exactly the opposite than what happened in Europe. Still, we take this nation state and all its logic and all its system without thinking that the process here was they just draw a line and was trapped in the line, was forced to become one state and one nation eventually. Whereas in Europe, it was not always, but basically it were existing groups, the nations who formed a state. So what I mean is that our whole mindset to copy goes so far that we even take this kind of thing. Even the word national is a tricky word. It's a wrong word. Because national has nothing to do with nation, but with state. International is interstate. These nations are there. So they have even kidnapped our words by referring to nation. The United Nation is not any United Nation. It's a conglomeration of states. A lot of nations are not there. So what I want to say is that our political system was embedded in it. And of course, in every country, you have people who is adventurous and who want power and bad goals. And the system opens all of that. So in the end, you get what we have in many countries. And once in a while, a good leader will come up by accident, I would say. But even then, you see, it doesn't work. So we have to talk critically about our whole political system, which is a system of envelopment, has nothing to do with mobilizes with our power. They kidnap our power. We sacrifice our power the day of the election. And that system will never, never work. After 100 years, we will come back and say, wait a minute, it didn't work. So the question is, how can we invent something else? And a lot of people in politics with good intention should ask that question because they know that the system does not work and does not live. And they are thinking the good ones, I got to go away because this system will be of no good. So there's a big issue there that we have to discuss. And I love to hear what Mr. Lumumba will say about it because he has powerful statement about these things. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Glenn. Reading the latest document that shook the whole world that the Pope released, called Fratelli Tutti, he made a statement as if it was a joke. He said he didn't know why it took so long for the church to unequivocally condemn slavery and various forms of violence. He was wondering why did it took so much for the church to condemn it. But again, it is also shocking that if you look at history, we are not talking about past history, but we are talking about present history. There are a lot of injustice and outright robbery from past colonial masters of African countries. I remember Dr. Arikana popularized what France was doing in French Africa consistently, and it has not ended because she went as far as calculating the amount of money France is reaping from African countries. So then, it also was so shocking to me that all these years, the church has not openly talked about that. If France is causing millions of people to suffer in Africa, then everything we want to talk about justice and peace should talk about that. Because as you give one hand with charity and you cause more damage with the other hand, and when people don't know this, they clap for you, oh, you are very charitable. But when they know the information, they get annoyed that you are the worst people. And this information, as far as I'm concerned, has to be out there. The more we get aware, the more we decide to do the right thing. The special case of Dr. Arikana was, we have not forgotten that. So then, we are going to invite the next speaker. I don't know, can my technical people confirm? We have to do some adjustments. We have to invite Professor Lumumba. so that he can speak. After that, if we still have Nnimmo, we can allow him some intervention before we do the final summary of this conference. Can my technical people confirm that Professor Lumumba is online? Not yet. So, do we have more questions to take? Glenn, can you please share more light on what I have just said about the present injustices that is being suffered? But before you answer that, let me bring in another question from the audience here in Kampala. Please come on. Say your name and shoot.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Jarombo Godfrey Nimungo, volunteer with the Change Africa for Good. My question to Dr. Glenn, I like when he made a statement that politics is a beauty contest of power used to mobilize people and ignore them later. And we have also heard that the future of Africa, and probably the whole world, is in the hands of the youth. And yet politically, the majority who fall in the ignored group are the youth. What are we going to do to lift up the ignored group? That is my question.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that question. Is Dr. Glenn there, please?
Yeah.
You can respond to that. Then we welcome Nnimmo Bassey, who will be waiting to give us his own input. Thank you.
Yes, the youth is a big concern for us, or a big force of energy, and they are the one who will populate the future. I will be there for a while, but I will not populate the future that they will do. So they have high stakes in what is going on. They have reason to be concerned. When a young man and a young girl marry and they get the first child, and they hold that child, that's one question that comes up, and all that happiness. What world will we bring and give to this child? And they become sad if they look around. So they have the initial incentive there, but for some reason they are distracted with Facebook, with this, with all kinds of things, with the system, and they don't follow up. They have a real problem. They dream of it, but they don't talk of it almost. So what I want to say with that is, do we have an immense possibility not to tell them what to do, that would be envelopment, but to let them come together and say, what the hell is going on? Are we going to be sitting ducks of small elites? They're small elites. 95% of the people of the world are okay. Maybe they steal a bit, they do something because they have no solution, but they can be brought back into a positive force. It is only a small group that dominates the world with capital, with economic power, military power, all kinds of presidents that go their own way, and all of that. And we tolerate that, and they have mechanisms to have that. So what we have to do is to see how we can change the game. You know, we play a game. Let me tell you the game we play. They have defined the game. That's why we got trapped. And the game has a rule. The last game of the rule is that we are the loser. So before we start playing the game, we lose by rules of the game. So what we have to say, listen, we don't want to play this game. We don't want to change the rule. We will play another game. And it is that different game that we have to play that is defined by Africa, defined by these powers which are there, suppressed that they are there. And you can awaken them. And once they awaken, you can go away because they walk on their own feet. So we have a big problem. We are trapped in a system, and all our questions, if we think that within the system we find the solution, there is not. And the question is how we can let people look in the mirror and say, wait a minute, this is not what we want. So I think that is the challenge. This conference was not made because we have the answers, but because we have questions. Not what the problem was, not what we suffer, but how we will solve it. Nobody is the answer. That's why the book I wrote is Quest to Rescue Our Future, not the model to rescue our future. It's a quest, which means we have no answer. But we have a lot of information, a lot of directions, till the answer should be found. So I think these questions will not be answered, all of them, but at least when we formulate them and accept them as the most relevant questions, we can make a start and we can find the first answers. So that is my comment that I can make on this.
Thank you very much, Dr. Glenn. And now permit me to introduce the next speaker. The next speaker is a poet. He has worked so much on the level of, on the section of environment and ecology. And he is the founder he's the director of ecologic think tank, Health of Mother Earth Foundation. So he's an environmental activist and is from Nigeria. Permit me to welcome Nnimmo Bassey. Nnimmo, if you are there, please unmute and address the audience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Father Ted, and thanks so much, Francis. Thank you, Glenn, and thank you all participants. It's such a pleasure to join. I mixed up my timing. Africa should be one time zone, maybe. So I just mixed up the time. I got trapped somewhere else. I will try to be as quick as possible because I really want to listen to Professor Lumumba. I missed a lot already, so I'm just caught in the middle like the sandwich. As Father Ted said, my work has been mostly on environmental politics, ecological issues, not surprising since I come from the Niger Delta, which is one of the top most polluted places on earth. Just like you can think of Democratic Republic of Congo or the oil field, the gold fields of Ghana or coal fields and gold fields of South Africa and all the polluted places, unfortunately, on our continent. Africa has suffered so much because of colonial and neo-colonial dependence on extractivism, and our politicians still believe that that is a route to progress, route to having a greater future. But the Chinese said, if you want to get out of a hole, you stop digging deeper. We're digging deeper into the problem, believing that's the way out. Extractivism is subtraction. Extractivism hardly does not add anything, And colonialism has been built on extractivism on labor, the issue of slavery, colonialism itself. It turned our agriculture into extractivist businesses, cash cropping in plantations, and forcing labor. Nowadays, we're having carbon slavery, where African forests are being seen as basically as carbon sinks, and communities are pushed away from those forests. And
it looks like we have lost Bassey. Network problem, possibly. Is Bassey there? Is Bassey there? As he tries to rejoin us, I would like to invite some questions.
Could I, Father Ted, could I just quickly run through? I will, sorry, I got knocked off. I take off my video so that maybe my internet will be a bit more clearer. So I take off my video and I'll just try to rush through the thoughts I have to share. I'm trying to say that all our infrastructure is still colonial, leading to the seaports, and this needs to be taken care of. The young leaders, new leaders need to review their infrastructural arrangement on the continent of Africa. And our communities are still being seen as sacrifice zones, good for nothing except for extraction and abuse. But there's a hope in what the AU is currently proposing. Talk about the Great Green Wall that would go from Djibouti all the way to Dakar in Senegal. That is about 8,000 kilometers stretch of a green belt that's 15 kilometers deep. There's a possibility of using that to experiment independence in terms of ecological changes on the continent. If this is turned into an economic zone of activities, a zone of economic activities where we grow indigenous trees, where communities are empowered to develop local economies and interact and interconnect and build solidarity, share seeds across the continent, and develop without having to use neo-colonial genetically engineered varieties that lock African farmers into markets that are not helping us. Now, we can actually do this by using local knowledge already existing in the Sahel. We have examples in Burkina Faso, examples in the Niger Republic. Burkina Faso, a man like Yakuba Sawadogo have regenerated forests in the Sahel, stick forests in the Sahel, using local knowledge, local technology. Father Tony Ronaldo, working with farmers in Niger, regenerated forests also through farmer-led root regeneration. We can take this and spread it across the whole region, across the continent, using local knowledge, local technology for economic progress and for instead of conflict and competition. And now I'm going to run off Cees quickly by reading taking some highlights from my book, To Cook a Continent, and I'm talking about what Thomas Sankara stood for before he was assassinated in Burkina Faso. Some of the things he did, apart from changing the name of the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso, the land of the all-right, it believed in economic self-reliance, promoted local food, local textile, and refused World Bank loans. Of course, he refused IMF loans. He embarked on land reform, whereby the land belonged to those who cultivated it. He was one of the early leaders who seriously spoke about environmental protection, especially against desertification. Sankara banned systems of male dominance in Burkina Faso and built rail infrastructure that actually helped people of the country. He declined having his photos hung in government offices, quite unlike what our politicians are doing. And I believe the young upcoming politicians should be more selfless, earn the same salaries as the workers, fly economy if you need to fly, fight corruption, and generally help work towards women's emancipation. These were some of the things that Thomas Sankara did, and we had great leaders like Kwame Nkrumah to learn from. Patrice Lumumba, very short time in office. Amilcar Cabral was an agronomist but became a liberator. Samuel Machel, Julius Nyerere. We have leaders to lean onto, to learn from. We don't have to start from square one. I thought I should just put all this on the table, and I hope that this adds to some of the ideas that I will bring up in this meeting today. Thank you so much and I'm happy the internet held up for a few moments for me to share my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Bassey. Let us give him a round of applause, please, those that are here. It is important. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Make it round. This is how to make round of applause.
So I will take two questions, two online, and then Bassey, you will get opportunity to respond to that. I'm seeing here hands raised online. Ngozi Hioma, please just unmute your microphone and shoot your question. Unmute your microphone, please.
Hello, Father Ted. I think I raised my hand.
Okay.
Or is there someone else who raised their hand?
Okay, as we are waiting for Ngozi to unmute her microphone, she's walking around it. Oh, Sister Ngozi Ihoma, she's doing that. Simbolele, please go ahead, ask your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. And this is a wonderful conference. I'm very happy to be a part of it. Responding to the lady who asked about getting rid of the dependency mindset in Africa, my suggestion would be that we boycott international companies that are providing food to Africa, because we already have the land, or live or occupy the land. We may as well use it. So by taking the money that you have and supporting your backyard manufacturer, your farmers, everyone, a black company that you believe in, rally behind them, support them, because all the money is with the people at the bottom, which is the majority of the people, which are black people. The power is with the top structures, the white people, the people who own the money, the politicians and whatever not. So all the money is with the people on the ground level. And all the people who are struggling to make it, they're not getting the loans from banks and things like that. So if we can take the money that we have and support your local designer, your farmers, your manufacturers, we will then be supporting and actually raising black economic power without us even knowing about it. They will feel the pinch, and we will no longer need them, and therefore the black economies will form their structures, factories and industries, and within no time, black communities will thrive. And what Thomas Sankara did in 40 years ago, we as black communities at the bottom will be able to mobilize ourselves, talents and assets in no time. And honestly, the money is with us. We just don't know it. And getting rid of the television, watching the news and everything else, those people at the top, they spend billions of dollars to hide the truth from us and feed us information that will make us go back to them and consume whatever they are producing, which in turn destroys us. So your backyard manufacturer does not have any intentions of destroying their customers. They need that money. So by supporting them, by buying from them, we will raise black economic power. Okay, so I think that mindset, we need to start honing in on it and growing it. We will then be able to thrive as a people. So that is my 2 cents. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Simbolele. Ngozi Ihoma, Sister Ngozi Ihoma, do you want to make your intervention, please?
Yes, I am Sister Ngozi Ihoma. I'm speaking from Portugal. I thank you for the invitation. Is a contribution all have made. In my own, I was able to summarize, since it was a little bit late, that I summarized my points there in the chat. So first of all, I have to say, my people, we have to believe on ourselves. Sometimes, according to what the last person, the person that speaks now, has finished saying, sometimes we don't believe in ourselves and what we can be. That we can be more creative than depending always on people outside. Starting from our leaders and ourselves in the down step or the local level of it. So we have to tell ourselves that we can do it and carry out in other potentials and every other things. I think we have the necessary things we need for such. Another point that I was about is that we have to work about on our common good. Sometimes our interest is our personal interest. When we put the interest of all, independent of the races, the tribe, the religion, and the social status, I think we can work better than everybody looking on his own side, that what my beneficial, the parts that I'm going to take or get from whatever I'm doing. So that is a very important point, because from the experience I have, there the white people or everybody, the dependents of the Europe or everybody, you see them working for the common good of their people, not for personal interest. They are more interested in the name they are going to make when they do something good than what they are benefiting from that. And that benefit is more of their good name. That is what I experienced from the local place or from the place I am staying. So our Africans, we have to try to liberate ourselves that this personal interest on what I'm going to get is not all that more necessary than the good of everybody. That is one point. I know this may cost us a lot of things, but I think it is worth investing on. Another point I said about is about the topic of our Pope Francis about dialogue and synodality. I'm very sorry, my Portuguese stack is also disturbing. I'm sorry. So we have to include many people. It's different perspective. We try to see things in different angles and not just saying it in that right angle. And not just we don't have all the truth. Let us believe that myself, I don't have the truth. You yourself, you don't have the truth. But in common, we can make things better by our different angles of seeing things. Our including many people's different specialists in the area we are talking about, so that they can help us to reflect, to think about many other things we can do. So I think this is very important, and not especially when we are talking about we are most of the young ones. Invite them, let us include them so that they can give their own opinion, and not just leaving them outside, or after we have finished structuring something without give it to them as if they are just there to manage our opinions. I don't think that is right. So, and lastly, in our formation is very interesting also. I thank God that most of us Africans, we are investing in our formation, specializing on many things, of which can also help us to grow better and develop better our environment, and also fight against bribery and corruption. This is what we all sometimes talk about the people at the head. Also starting at the local level. What are we doing when we sell things? What are we doing when we interact with our people? What are we doing? Try to eliminate all the spirit of corruption in the local level, also in the local level, starting from the local level to the upper hand. So this is my contribution. Thank you. I don't want to waste a lot of time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Sister Ihoma. Now I will allow Dr. Bassey to respond to that a little bit. And then, Glenn, if you have something to add, we give you 2 minutes after Bassey has spoken. Is Bassey there? Is Nnimmo Bassey still there?
Oh yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, that was for you, or that was for you. So if you want to, it's not a question, but that was an intervention. If you want to add to what they have said. Thank you. Come on. Is Bassey still there? Okay, Glenn, do you want to contribute to what they have said?
Oh.
After that, then I will invite Professor Lumumba. Welcome.
I just saw Bassey was saying something. Sorry, yeah, Bassey is there.
Okay, Bassey, let's hear from you.
Yes, thank you so much. Again, apologies for my internet. I was actually trying to change my system, but that didn't work out quick enough. Let me just say quickly that, well, there was more like comments, which I agree with, so I don't need to interrogate what was said. But to say really, including the notes I've seen in the chat box, we really need to decolonize the narrative about Africa. We have to tell our own stories. We have to build up our imaginaries. I believe the way to liberation is to have our stories. We have to define what is a good life. We have to define what is the future that we want.
Thank you very much. Glenn?
Yes, you hear me. I love the intervention because you feel that with the different points that are being made, we are all in a quest. We are looking for solutions. We know that we have problems and we are looking for solutions. And one of the words that come up a lot is decolonization. And it is very important because it has to do with our mental
this
slavery,
in relation moving in the very wrong
with our possibility to get forward. But let me say something about decolonization. Decolonization is not to get rid of everything, because there are things you cannot get rid of because you are a product. It is about the future. What do you do with what you are? Let me give an extreme example. How can a mulatto decolonize physically? By committing suicide? Because you cannot eliminate the white gene or the black. There's nothing wrong with genes, by the way, whether black, red, or whatever color. So you have, in a way, to say, listen, this is what we became. We didn't ask for it. We didn't want it. But from here on, we will go forward on our terms. So we will not say we don't speak English because English is a colonial language. What was happening? It was very fun in the Caribbean. In the 60s, they say, we have to ban everything of colonial origin, and they were speaking English. So it's not about that. It's not about taking people their religion off. It is about, here we stand, this is not where we want to be, and now we want to walk on our own feet from here on. So we are on ruins. We cannot restore the past, but on these ruins, we will create our future. That should be the concept of decolonization, not just an opposition against what we reject from the past, we should reject, but you cannot change, you cannot take away everything if you are the manifestation, the crystallization of colonialism. When you speak their language, when you have to use that for your purposes and to build. So once we do that, our critique of colonialism will be the same, but our project will be, again, don't fight the bad, let's create something of ourselves. And please don't mess with our thing, because that's where we will get angry and we will defend it. And maybe we have to defend it by weapons. If you want to break, if you want to cut our new tree, we will defend it. That's another story. But we have to get out of the idea of decolonization as if we get physical rid of everything. The most important and critical decolonization is what was brought forward, is you have to decolonize from mental slavery. Because if you don't do that, you cannot grow out of your own reality. So one of the big issues in the 50 years of decolonizing discussion is that it was too much understood, like an anti-Western thing, without putting enough elements of creating our own thing towards the future. So I think I see these discussions going on, and I like very much the points that are being made, because we are in a certain ambiance, the same ambiance of looking for solution, and I see the different contribution to that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Glenn. And now permit me to usher in the next and our final speaker today, who is Professor Lumumba. Professor Lumumba, I know a lot of people have heard and have listened to his speeches. He has talked so much on the issues about Africa. And he has galvanized a lot of Pan-Africanist spirit all over Africa. Young Africans everywhere are identifying with him. Fortunately for me, I was also his students at Parklands, University of Nairobi Law Campus. Prof may not know it, but I will tell him something. During his classes on human rights and humanitarian law, the classes are always filled to capacity, and with students always brimming on the corridor. And I asked, but why? They say, well, are they registered? They say, no, they are not registered, but nobody would not like to listen to professor speak. Why are they not registered for this elective? Oh, they know that the bar is very high. That the bar is very high. So they come for knowledge. So, Prof, I was surprised, an erudite scholar like you, and one of the best lawyers in Kenya, and finally you decided to take to preaching. You became an evangelizer. You became a missionary. And actually, later I saw the wisdom, because the amount of African young men and women that are following you and are so much galvanized to make a change in Africa is amazing. So I have just mentioned my own contact with him and what I feel. Let me now invite Professor P.L.O. Lumumba. Prof, you're welcome.
Thank you very much. Let me first of all say how glad I am this evening to share this platform with good men and women. And let me appreciate those who have spoken before me. I've had the advantage of listening to Glenn a little more than anybody else, and Nnimmo. But I want to preface my presentation, informed partly but by some of the comments that I'm reading. And that makes me start by saying that today, when we talk about Africa, there are two sets of Africans. If you want to graduate them to schools of thought, you may. They are Afro-pessimists who, for every solution that you suggest about Africa, they'll find a problem. Such individuals should not worry us. They are Afro-optimists, and I belong to that school, who hold the view that Africa has been making strides. And it is also true that certain things have not been happening as fast as we would desire them to happen. I also want to remind us that Africa and Africans are not the only people who have been colonized throughout history. If you look at the history of Europe, the Danes will tell you that they were colonized. The Norwegians will tell you that they were colonized. So colonization has not been unique to Africa. The Asians were colonized. India was a colony of the United Kingdom until 1947. At that time, of course, it was comprising Pakistan and Bangladesh. The Vietnamese will tell you that they were colonized by the French. The Indonesians will say so, the Singaporeans and the Malaysians. So sometimes we behave as if we are the only ones who are colonized. No, not true. It is also not true that it's only Africans who have been enslaved. Slavery has been there, and there are civilizations that have been enslaved. The Africa that worries us is the post-colonial Africa. The Africa which we ordinarily want to think about from the time that Ghana regained independence in 1957. Barring, of course, Liberia, which regained our independence in 1847 under unique circumstances. Barring Ethiopia, which was not successfully subdued, although the Italians attempted. We are talking about that Africa, which was a beneficiary of struggle by our people to regain their independence. And it is of that Africa of which the Osagyefo Kwame Nkrumah, speaking on the day of independence of Ghana, said that Ghana's freedom means nothing unless the entire continent of Africa is free. That Africa had colonial experience that was varied and different. Before the World War, the Germans were here in Tanzania or Tanganyika then, and Namibia, and there's German influence in the Cameroons, in what was then Dahomey. The Spaniards were here, the Portuguese, the Italians, the Dutch, the French, the English, and sometimes we forget even the Arabs. So Africa has had these experiences. And as Kwame Nkrumah said in his book on neocolonization, that the direct colonial project was easier to deal with. The most pernicious and dangerous form of colonization is the neocolonial project. And that neocolonial project is alive as we speak, because the neocolonial project is subterranean. It is a little more subtle. It creates a situation where, on the face of it, you have individuals in positions of leadership who are your very own, but they are lackeys of foreign powers. We saw them in La Côte d'Ivoire with Félix Houphouët-Boigny. We saw them in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo with Joseph Kasavubu and Mobutu Sese Seko. And we have seen many of them, these lackeys of the erstwhile colonizers who look to Madrid, look to Paris, look to London, look to Brussels. The net effect, therefore, is that the colonizer left, but still has a footprint. Remember that when the colonialists left, if they were British colonizers, they created something called the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is not a body of brotherhood or sisterhood. It is a subterranean, surreptitious attempt by the British to retain control over their former colonies. That is why the Commonwealth has as its permanent head the monarch of the English. And they do very interesting things. If you are ambassadors, for example, if you are members of the Commonwealth, your ambassadors are not called ambassadors, they are called high commissioners. They still want to remain with that tug. The French also has their own body that deals with former French colonies. The Portuguese also have their own. And these are very deliberate things that are designed to ensure that you still remain within the orbit of the erstwhile colonizer. And appreciating that as we do, you can then understand why in the very early days of independence, what some describe as flag independence, whenever an African leader emerged who wanted to break the chains and manacles of the erstwhile colonial power, they were victims of coup d'etats or assassinations. That is how you explain the coup d'etat against the Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah. That is how you explain the coup d'etat against Modibo Keita. That is how you explain the assassination of Patrice Emery Lumumba. That is how you explain the assassination of Isidore Thomas Sankara. Because these were individuals who very early on were clear that if we were to give true meaning to independence, we had to move on a different trajectory. And even where they did not succeed, there were attempts. In 1971, there was a mutiny in all East African countries. There was a mutiny against Mwalimu Kambarage Nyerere. There was a mutiny in Uganda. There was a mutiny in Kenya, because the colonizer does not want us to leave the orbit. So it behooves us to remember that we have a duty and a task, and that we are facing powers that are very clear in their agenda. I only invite you because a session such as this does not lend itself to detailed history. But I want you to read the speeches. There were 32 of them delivered in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, between the 24th and 25th days of May in 1963, on the occasion of the formation of the Organization of African Unity. Everybody was inspired on that day. But the most enlightening, the most passionate, the most impatient, the most effective speech delivered on that day was by the Osagie for Kwame Nkrumah. And he told his audience on that day, we must live here with a single government. We must live here with a single army, with a single high command. We must live here with a single currency, because if we don't, we are going to be divided, we are going to remain weak, and we are going to remain susceptible to the diabolical machinations and manipulations of the erstwhile colonizer turned neo-colonizer. The Osagie was right. Today, when I look at some of the things that are being said by the African Union, which is the successor of the OAU, when I look at Africa Agenda 2063, when I look at Africa Continental Free Trade Area, when I look at the protocol in Yamoussoukro about free airspaces, when I look at the Malabo protocol on agriculture, when I look at the Abuja protocol, when I look at the Lagos Plan of Action, when I look at the Maputo protocol on women and children, there is nothing new. The Osagie spoke about them in 1963. But we were victims of a number of things, the primary of which is the manipulation of the erstwhile colonizers and some within our ranks who occupied positions of leadership and allowed themselves to be manipulated and to be used. And they are still there. And we too are co-authors of our own misfortune, particularly we who have gone to school, we, including myself. Because in our unguarded moments, we suffer from the worst of diseases, low self-esteem. And I was telling a friend of mine that you only have to listen and to see how Africans behave. When there was an election in the United States of America, you would think that the African intelligentsia are Americans. How they sing the praises of Joe Biden. How our intellectual women look at what the wife of Joe Biden is wearing, but they don't care about the problems in Tigray in Ethiopia. They don't even know that there are elections in Central African Republic. They don't know that there is an election in Mali. They don't know that there is an election in Uganda. They don't know there is an election in Tanzania. But you ask them what is happening in the United States of America, they know. You ask them who has been appointed in the cabinet of Joe Biden, they know. We who have gone to school. So when Glenn and others talk about decolonizing the mind, it is not the man and woman in village. No, it is you and me. It is you and me who have a problem. It is you and me who must decolonize our minds because we are influencers. And don't tell me it can't be done. It can't be done. It can't be done. Thomas Sankara took over power when I was a student in 1983. After 4 years, he was eliminated. But within 4 years, he had changed the name of the country from Upper Volta to Burkina Faso. Within 4 years, he had made Burkina Faso self-sufficient in food. Within 4 years, he had changed the minds of the people of that country. Post-genocide Rwanda, Paul Kagame has succeeded in hoisting Rwanda from the quicksand of fratricidal massacres. And whether you like him or not, there is something good happening in Rwanda. Whether you like it or not, there is something good that is happening in Tanzania with John Joseph Pombe Magufuli. There is a sense in which there are people who are doing things. If you go to West Africa, I do not agree with Macky Sall on all things, but you go to West Africa and Senegal, there are certain things that are happening there that are worthy of being talked about. And one can go on and on. So I hold the view, in order to speak to the subject, politics in solidarity with the people and service to African unity. It is incumbent upon us to exercise the ghost of self-doubt. When I look at Africa, and you may not agree with me on this particular thing, If you look at Africa in the recent past, one of the greatest problems in Africa is brought about by this thing that has been defined to us by the European called democracy. And the Western definition of democracy means the following. 1, multi-party politics. 2, periodic elections. I have no problem with that. But what is the essence of democracy is people participation. But have you seen now that almost in every African country after election there is conflict? Kenya, Ghana, Mali, Guinea, Tanzania, Uganda, Ethiopia, everywhere. Do I have an answer? I have ideas, I have thoughts, which is that Africa must now begin to ask ourselves whether we can have methods of people participation which are not conflictual to the extent that they threaten our nations. Are they there? Nana Kobinan Ketsia, the great Ghanaian political philosopher who himself a traditional ruler in Ghana, says that there is something that can be done. Nobody claims the monopoly of knowledge, and nobody can. But I'm saying, isn't there justification for re-examining this thing? I leave it to you to determine. Number 2, there is also the whole idea that the countries that we inherited after we regained our independence were artificial and therefore not sustainable. But you must remember this question of redrawing the boundaries was a major discussion in 1963. As I conclude, I remember Kwame Nkrumah and Julius Kambarage Nyerere arguing about this thing. And there were those who took the view at that time that we should redraw the boundaries. But the leader said that if we started redrawing the boundaries, there would be too much conflict. And that is why in 1964 in Cairo, they came up with the doctrine of the inviolability of independence boundaries. True, but yet we also know that in the year 2011, there was what one may describe as a shift from that position when South Sudan was created. And it is therefore something that we've got to begin to talk about. And this, as I move closer to my presentation, is how I understand the African Union. The African Union is something that, as you know, after the Kagame reforms in 2016, that is designed to de-emphasize the boundaries and to focus on the things that unite us. One of them is trade. And the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, which was launched in Ghana early this year, is meant to eliminate tariff and non-tariff barriers. Of course, we know that there will be a number of difficulties in this regard. We know that there are difficulties within the ECOWAS region, within the Maghreb region, within the SADC region, within the East African region and the Central African region, but I think it is a good thing. And you only have to look at the history of the European Union, which started as the Steel Union in 1950, and as recently as last year, Britain went in and went out. So there is no struggle without difficulties. So I'm suggesting to us that there are no hard and fast rules. But when I look at Africa, there is a suggestion to me, which is evidence-based, that there are many things that are now beginning to happen. Look at the African passport. This is the year when we are beginning, hopefully we are going to begin to have Africans moving without let and hindrance across the continent. And in my younger days, I used to be impatient. I used to think that things can only be deemed successful when they happen during my lifetime. I no longer think like that, because what is my lifetime? At the very best, 70. And in the life of a nation which can last 1,000 years, what is that? Nothing. So you've got to think about things in an intergenerational manner. If you look at the United States of America, when you read the Universal, the Declaration of Independence says we hold these things to be self-evident that all men are born equal and that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable right, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in 1863. And yet 100 years later in 1963, the black man could not vote. That is why MLK and others were involved in the civil rights movement. So if you look at it intergenerationally, what one can say is that our duty is to play our part. And when you play your part in an organized manner, that will be your contribution. So today, as I conclude, I am beginning to see a number of things happening in Africa. In the area of aviation, I see the Yamoussoukro Protocol, and I see airlines moving in Africa, although COVID has interacted, but you only have to see the Ethiopian airline and how successful it is. You only have to see Rwanda airline as recently as yesterday. Rwanda has now started a route in Bangui in Central African Republic. The Kenya Airways is tottering, so that area is doing very well. The other area is in the area of agriculture. We are now beginning to see that African countries are moving towards talking about feeding themselves. In the health sector, we have not done very well, but it's also important to know that the African Union has now created 5 centers for disease control. In the area of innovation and invention, and one can go on and on. But when we talk about African solidarity, we must not be understood to be saying for one moment that we are going to isolate ourselves from the world. No, we cannot, and it's not even desirable. We now see the Chinese in this part of the world. And I like and admire what the Chinese are doing. They know what they want and they are working at it. It is our duty to recognize what we want and we must work at it. The Americans are going to know what they want and they are working at it. The Europeans know what they want and they are working at it. It is our duty now to recognize what we want and we must work at it. And I can't agree more with the men and women who said we must decolonize our minds. And decolonization of the mind means that we must begin to think differently. It is the mind that is the standard of the man. Martin Luther King used to say, and I agree with him. But we must be careful that we must not have what Henry David Thoreau described, improve means to an unimproved end. We must ask ourselves, what are we doing and how will it improve the quality of the lives of our people? Once we achieve that, and I want also, because I know I'm speaking to the clergy here, and I'm a believer I'm a practicing Christian. The Christian message must also change. We have a form of Christianity now, which form of Christianity is completely anti-Christ and is contemplated in Paul's second letter to Timothy at chapter 3 when he says, in the last days there'll be a form of Christianity. This Christianity where people think that you can do nothing and then you pray and fast and things will happen, that is not Christianity. The Christian fraternity must remember with Paul and James that we have a duty to work and remember what is said in Genesis, by the sweat of our brow shall we eat. It is also important that we delink ourselves, this bowl in hand culture of writing proposals to Western European organizations through the NGOs. We must also do away with it. We can do things, and I have no doubt in my mind that if we do that, Africa will meet the Chinese on equal terms, will meet the Europeans on equal terms, will meet the Koreans in equal terms, and we will be able to achieve it. Do I see anything happening in Africa that is positive? Yes. I look at a few things happening in Namibia now and Botswana, and I think they're on the right trajectory in the mining sector. The Democratic Republic of Congo, theoretically the richest country on the continent of Africa, trying to put their act together. I hope something is going to happen there. Rwanda, doing good things in the health sector, in the area of innovation. I look for great things there. Tanzania, financing their own railway with their own internally generated resources. Ethiopia was doing very well, but for the struggle now in the Tigray region, and you go to West Africa, there is something good happening in Senegal. You go to Ghana, I know they contested about the election, but this idea of an industry per district is a good thing that we should build on. So in a nutshell, I hold the view that all hands must be on deck. And for those of us who are Afro-pessimists, whose only claim to fame is that they find the problem for every solution that we prescribe, we are asking you to liberate yourself from the chains and manacles of self-doubt. It is that American President Theodore Roosevelt who said, when all is said and done, it's not the critic who matters. Those who live in the twilight between victory and defeat. Those who matter, those who are in the arena, whose words are wedded with the action. I have no doubt that it can be done. Nnimmo talked about the ecology and the belt from Djibouti to Senegal. It is being done and it will be done. And I heard my friend Glenn talking about the idea of ensuring that Africa is at the dinner table as an equal partner. I did not listen to Cees, but I know they spoke the same thing in essence, or Swala the same thing, Francis Sekate the same thing. It can be done and it will be done. Our duty is to play our part. God bless you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you very much, Professor Lumumba. That's it. That's it. Now, we have time to, as is our tradition, we'll take some questions to and allow Professor to react to that. And after that, then we call in, there are some small, we give them 3 minutes intervention that we prepared earlier on. I don't know whether there are some questions here in the audience. Please, let's start with the audience first. Please come and take the microphone, introduce yourself, and shoot your question to the professor. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm P.L.O Francis Bile from Kampala, Uganda. I loved what the professor presented, and it's something very, very real. Now, I'm looking at a lot of interventions being undertaken by the different stakeholders for Africa's destiny, starting with the family as the smallest unit. We look at the way the environment is being affected in line with achieving the destiny. We see a lot of stakeholders there, the youth, the women, the politicians, the religious, the educationists. I'm wondering at the best way how all these stakeholders can come together to work together in the fight to attain our destiny while we also interact with other people within the African continent in particular. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And online, I'm inviting Connie Arnoldus. Please, you can unmute your microphone and ask your question. Thank you. Is Connie there?
I'm here?
Yeah, good.
Are you listening to me?
Exactly. We are listening to you. We are hearing clearly.
Okay. Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you for this opportunity. I'm very well pleased to hear Professor Mulumba and my fellow countrymen from Aruba. I am from Curaçao, a little island in the Caribbean, and of the Kingdom of the Netherlands. I live in the Netherlands, and so I can say now I am a Hebrew diaspora. I'm so glad with all those interventions. And what I'm going to say is by the grace of God. I thank you all very much for this opportunity, because it's the first time I have this opportunity to talk to African people about what their problem is. And I say by the grace of God, because it is God that revealed this to me, and I have been educated by economists from Romania. And I can say very boldly, one of the best economists of the world that educated me for 5 years about the money system. The Bible says the love of money is the root of most evil. So if that is so, then we have to study money. And this day, please, African people, please, everybody that listen to me, listen very careful. African problem, and this is the problem of the whole world, is the money system that is wrong. They built this money system to bankrupt the whole world and to enslave us financially. The money system is the wrong system we are operating in. We can talk everything, we can come with great ideas, and we can deliberate everything, as long as you don't talk about the money system, as long as you don't touch their money system, because it is private. They will sit back and laugh at us, because they know very well where the problem is and where they are doing. John F. Kennedy was killed because he wanted to change back the Federal Reserve notes into the United States notes. They are still the Federal Reserve notes because the Federal Reserve has private shareholders. And how does this system operate? The Federal Reserve is the only bank, they call them the lender of last resort, that create money for the world out of nothing, yes? But they charge interest that they don't put back in the economy so that we can earn that. So they put the interest in their own pockets, and we cannot earn it to pay it back. So the next thing we need to do is to borrow some more money again, so that we can keep on paying our debts. And our debts are growing faster than the money that is in the economy, because we pay our debts. So that is the trick. The interest, it's not in the economy, so that we can earn the interest. Now, we all know that the United States has bound every country in the world to link themselves to the dollar. Why? Because the Federal Reserve wants that every time almost the whole world don't have their sovereign money. If the central bank of a country wants money, they need to buy it from the Federal Reserve first. And the Federal Reserve will give their money with interest to the country. So at the moment the money arrives to a country, the country has already debt. And because all that money must go back with interest that they don't put in the economy, so that we can earn it, so that we can pay our debt. So as long as we stay in this system where all the countries are bound to the US dollar, to the Federal Reserve, it is over with our whole system.
Thank you very much.
What do Africa need to do? Africa need to unite. That's number one. Africa need to cut herself off from the dollar, have their own central bank, have its own money, and not just money, but sovereign money. And sovereign money means that you are not linked to the dollar. Africa needs to become the lender of last resort for his own continent and just drop the dollar and stand on her own feet.
Okay.
We,
Thank
Africa,
you. Thank you very much. Connie, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Can I say, yes,
the
can
point,
I say one more thing?
The point is very clear.
Yes, we can bankrupt Europe and the United States in 1 hour.
Thank you very much.
And now we unite and have our own money. That's the problem, not only for Africa, but from the whole world.
Thank you very much. That point is very clear. The money system. I will just take
the money system is the problem.
Yes. Another question. Joshua, just briefly, in a minute, please. You wanted to ask a question so that we can allow the professor to respond to that, and then we call in our 5 minutes in interveners. Joshua, please come.
Thank you so much. I'm glad that my question has been pushed up to this point. I've been raising my hand for long. And I want to say a special thanks to Professor Lumumba because of the points that he really touched. Earlier on, my colleagues, that was Ngozi and Simbulede, had touched exactly some of the things I wanted to say. And I get it back to the point of having empathy. I think Africa, we're having a big problem that we are not empathetic to our own selves. You'll find someone will enter a supermarket or let's say grocery store and buy things expensively. This could be a foreign supermarket, an international supermarket that sends back all the proceeds to their home countries. But when you walk out of this grocery store, you'll find an old woman selling some kind of bananas on the streets, and you'll ask for the price, and she will tell you the price, and you'll begin bargaining. You want her to drop the price to something that you feel is comfortable with you. But you've just been spending a lot of money paying an international business at a high price. So we are at that point where we need to get empathetic to ourselves. An African business operating, for example, here in Uganda, may have a challenge even competing with international businesses. And you'll find someone is so comfortable walking into KFC to have a piece of chicken at a very high price, but this same person is not willing to spend that same amount in the neighboring restaurant that would give the same service. So in the end, we have glorified a foreign person. In the end, we see others as the best. We do not trust our own systems. And this is something that is hurting us. This is something that we cry of colonialism. We cry that a white man is doing this to us. But then there are some things that we can control. And I want to plead to my fellow Africans, let's try to learn how to believe in each other. When you see a fellow African starting a business, how can you support that person to prosper? Not looking at that person as inferior to an international business. That is something that's key for us as Africans. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, now, Professor P.L.O. Lumumba, please, if you could make some response, reactions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just very briefly, let me start with Okello. And in speaking to the question posed by Okello and Joshua, I think we are saying the same thing. And one of the things that I think is very important, the African problem has now been analyzed, and we actually have identified the problem. So we are in a very good space where the diagnosis has been made. The question is, what antidote do we apply? And to a certain extent, that also we recognize. And that is what brings to the fore what Connie from Curaçao is saying. Let me just speak a little bit more about our African brethren in the Caribbean and outside of the continent of Africa, normally called Africans in the diaspora. I was listening to a speech made by Martin Luther King Jr., I think in 1966. He was telling African Americans then, and even Malcolm X, that do you know that your resources, that you are the fourth richest nation on earth? If you look at the resources of African Americans in the United States of America. But how do you spend it? Where are your banks? Where are your insurance companies? Where are your construction companies? In other words, there must be a self-realization. And during our lifetime, we have seen the Indians do it. A few years ago, when I was a student at the university, China meant nothing. China meant nothing. Within 30 years, the Chinese have succeeded in lifting nearly 700 million of their population into some lower middle class. What did they do? They just did the right thing. They just did things that were in the best interest of China. What did the Japanese do? They did things that were in the best interest of Japan. What did South Korea do? They did things that were in the best interest of Korea. Right now, if you look at the textile industry in Vietnam, which was in war until when I was in Standard 7 a few years ago, you will be amazed. Vietnam now produces more coffee than Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania combined. So I can't agree more that there is need for solidarity. Our sisters and brothers in their diaspora, nobody is asking you to physically relocate to Africa. You don't need to, because indeed, those countries where you are, yeah, they are our countries. They are an extension of Africa. Those countries are there because our people were taken there as slaves. So you are not just about to leave those countries, but we are saying that you must remember that Africa is the mother ship. And I would want to see a company that is incorporated in Curaçao, a company that is incorporated in Antigua and Barbuda, in Trinidad and Tobago, and in Jamaica, operating and enjoying free let and hindrance, that you have a visa, that you have a passport for which you do not need a visa when you are coming to the continent of Africa. If we do that, that we are going to break away from this hold that they have on us. Fiat money that you have talked about, Connie, is something that Africans recognize. Kwame recognized it in 1963. Muammar al-Gaddafi, it is said that part of the reason why he became an arch enemy of the Americans, because he was saying we must have our own currency and it's going to be pegged on gold, not this fiat money, which the dollar is. So the ideas, and you can see very recently, when the Africans were West Africa was trying to create their own currency, the ECO, the French very quickly came in and renamed the CFA franc into ECO because they still want to control it from Paris. But these are struggles, as I conclude. It is not going to be easy. It is not for the faint-hearted. If we think that the Europeans are just going to walk away from the gold in the Congo, that they are just going to walk away, they are not just going to walk away. It is going to be a battle of wits, and it's only going to happen when we are united, as Joshua said. You imagine, and this is what the British want. The British would prefer that they negotiate with Lesotho as Lesotho. They would prefer that they negotiate with Kenya as Kenya. Suppose we negotiated as the African Union, so that anything that Kenya wants is a part of the buffet of the things that are on the table from the African side. The European Union comes to Africa, and the EU, the 27 countries, then they want to negotiate with Malawi. How can they? And we accept it because those whom we have entrusted with leadership, you buy some of them a house in Dubai or a house in Paris or in London, then they will do anything, including selling their motherland. But I am now beginning to see, this is why I think that the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is something that we must work at. And somebody said something, every hand must be on deck, civil society. Those of you who are in the religious sector, it is Martin Luther King Jr. who used to say, yes, we want to go to heaven, but before we go to heaven, we must wear shoes here on earth. We must eat here on earth. We must have things here on earth. So before we go to the new Jerusalem, we want an intermediary Jerusalem, which also affords us the things of the flesh and makes us prepare for the hereafter. And those of you who are in the religious sector, don't buy this nonsense when you are told that the religion and politics must be separated. What is politics other than the affairs of men? And the affairs of men include matters physical and matters spiritual. So that when I am physically not well, spiritually I'll not be prepared. And the clergy who are here, at the risk of misinterpreting the Bible, why do you think that Christ fed 5,000 people or 4,000 people? Because he knew that if the body is not fed, the spirit will not be ready to listen to the word. So, ladies and gentlemen, I see a bright Africa which will be built by people in the diaspora and those in the mother continent. I can't agree more that there is a book that I'm reading, which some of you have read. You are familiar with this book by Kwame Nkrumah, Neo-Colonialism, the last stage of imperialism. We are in this phase. Africa is in this phase. And the erstwhile colonizers are much more dangerous now. They are much more dangerous because they are not dealing with us directly. They are using people like you and me. They are using your brother, they are using your sister, and therefore we think that they are pulling with us, but yet they are being used from elsewhere. But we cannot say that. We cannot and must not accept that it cannot be achieved. It is our duty to ensure that we change this. Thank you and God bless you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lumumba. Thank you very much. That was very wonderfully said. And now we will move forward to invite our prepared interveners who initially indicated that they would like to speak in this conference. Is Elaine Tanchak there and ready? Is Elaine online and ready? Is Jack Menke there? Is Karina there?
I'm here, yes.
Oh, Jack, you are there?
Here is Jack Menke. Yes.
Oh, Jack, come on.
I'm ready.
Yeah, please. Give us what you have. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Yes, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Jack Menke. First of all, let me congratulate the organizers and participants of this mind-blowing conference. And I also take the opportunity to extend my best wishes to Cees Hamelink of the Rescue Our Future Foundation, and also to the people of Africa. As I said, I am from Suriname, the second smallest country on the continent of South America, a continent that has historically been linked to Africa in many ways, and also to Europe, if you think of the Atlantic triangular trade. And this part of colonialism is very much connected with the diversity of the population of Suriname today. Our gathering today occurs amidst irresponsible resource exploitation, environmental degradation, climate change, and a COVID-19 pandemic. This pandemic reflects sharp global inequalities in death rates and distribution of vaccines, demonstrating huge profits made by the leading global vaccine producing industries. And a vaccinate me first of the metropolitan countries. Allow me to make 3 brief observations. First, most important of this historical conference is to present a future Africa beyond the genesis of our human race in this continent. An Africa that takes us to the 21st quest of humanity and elaborate on a we quest rather than a I quest. And in this context of the African Ubuntu that has been mentioned various times today, we need working together across continents to create a humanity that brings together solidarity and communitarism for caring and sharing in harmony from a we perspective. Ubuntu promotes cooperation between persons, between cultures, between nations, and also between continents. A second observation takes me to South America. Partly thanks to the Amazon forest encounter that was held annually from 2004 to 2015 on the nature reserve Brownsburg, a mountain in Suriname in the north of South America. Our diverse, sustainable humanity family that was very small makes a great leap forward today with this conference on the good of Africa. The tiny sparks, the very tiny sparks on this forested Brownsburg mountain in Suriname gave birth to networks across the globe in a quest to rehumanize humanity from a we perspective. And this resulted during 10 years in a comprehensive movement with the participation of over 150 people from 16 countries, mostly in the Caribbean and South America. In dialogue with Glenn Sankat Singh, who wrote the book Quest to Rescue the Future, we learned that one cannot give or bring or transfer development, but it is always a process from within. And that's why he defines development as the mobilization of one's own capabilities in a project of self-realization in response to the challenge of nature, living environment, resources, and history aimed at realizing one's own project. Finally, my third observation, this perspective of development is found across the ages in the African Ubuntu, in indigenous Pachamama of South America, Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Islam, authentic Christianity, and other worldviews to harmonize cultivation and care for the planet Earth. Such perspectives of development are also part of traditional worldviews of various groups in South American countries. While this timely event on Africa brings together people from various continents, people from various walks of life, generations, and also various social spheres, it inspires us to continue this quest for humanity's future and organize in the second half of this year a global conference. How can South America take command of its destiny by mobilizing its potential? Let us unite. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Jack. Is Elaine ready to speak? Is Elaine there?
Yes.
Yes, come in, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. It is morning for me. My name is Elaine Timchak, and I'm the founder and executive director of Cultivate, a social good organization focused on how the world does charity. I want to share with you some brief thoughts about how African potential can change Africa's most pressing community problems. Africa's potential is great, as we've been talking about all day today, and its ability to take charge of its own destiny is foundational to the continent's future success. However, we live in a globalized reality where power still is in the hands of the wealthy and influential. In the philanthropic sector, which I am a part of, this reality is played out in several ways. As Professor Glenn said, what is good for the West is believed to be best for the rest. The elite define what charity is on the African continent. Those who control charitable funds are the ones who ultimately decide what kind of charitable programs are offered across Africa. And African leaders who know what is best for their own communities are often relegated to middle or lower levels of programmatic management rather than the driving forces of social good. So what can we do? The broken systems of the philanthropic sector must be changed, which will take those in power finally relinquishing it in order to pursue the greater good. The professionals, the experts, the leaders of foundations, NGOs, and other funding entities must learn to serve communities rather than dictate their progress. Leaders in the philanthropic sector must learn to trust the inherent knowledge and experience of communities and their leaders. For communities that need outside financial resources in order to accomplish their desired social change, funders must learn to give greater autonomy to programs to determine their own priorities, focus areas, and impact measurements, rather than predetermining those factors and then only funding programs that meet their standards. Funders must give greater trust and autonomy to African community organizations and stop dictating how change should take place. But I don't believe there are many funders in on this call today. So what are we talking about? Until this change takes place, Africans must learn to play by the rules set by the elite until they have the power to change the rules themselves. African community leaders must have the knowledge and skills necessary to be able to competitively access the necessary financial resources to fuel the social good that the continent needs. To do this, leaders must build up their capacity and understanding of the global philanthropic sector, especially its expectations of how funding for social change should be utilized. If Africans can work within the norms and expectations set by the charitable sector, then they will gain the necessary respect, status, and opportunities to speak into changing how things are done. This growth in knowledge and skills must start with an understanding of how the global charitable sector operates, regardless of its unfortunate disconnect from African norms and practices. Once African community leaders of charitable programs have such knowledge and skills, then they can be the driving forces in changing the global norms and practices that negatively influence how efforts to lead African social good. The charitable sector and its supporters have heard too often about the vast challenges of poverty, oppression, injustice, marginalization that African communities face. But people have tuned out these cries because the problems feel too overwhelming. African leaders of social good programs must learn to tell a different story, one of potential, opportunity, and growth. When the world truly grasps the potential of the African continent, I believe with my whole heart, more funds will be funneled into social good programs. And the more funds such programs have, the more positive change we will see. As such change takes place, this will influence the global philanthropic sector to trust African leadership and wisdom and open themselves up to more equal and balanced power relationships between donor and recipient, funders, and programs. I believe that some leaders within the global charitable sector are starting to see this that the systems-wide change needs to take place, not only for African social good programs, but for all charitable programs across the entire world. But this change is going to take some time. The more we collectively be the ones who are leading this change, people like you and me who are in at this conference today, the more the rest of the world will listen and start to follow. My organization, Cultivate, is a US-based nonprofit organization that is fighting for such change by providing training and coaching to African community leaders so their social good programs can successfully engage with funders and be the driving force for this change in the charitable sector. I just want to throw out there that we're always open to working with more dedicated, passionate African leaders like yourselves who are ready to grow in their skills and capacity to lead the community programs into their next chapter of social good. If you're interested in learning more, please just connect with me. I'll share more information on the chat. But I want to recognize that everything that has been said today is so powerful and so needed, not only across the African continent, but across the entire developing world. People who are with me on this in the United States, we need to hear from you more. We need to hear about your potential. We need to hear your ideas. You need to take the pulpit. You need to take the opportunities that are not even offered to you at times and demand for such change. Because unfortunately, the elite who hold the funds are the ones determining how social good is done in Africa, and we have to change the system. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Thank you. That was very wonderful and very warm. Yes, the message is loud and clear. The last speaker, those who have been programmed to intervene, is she there? Is Karina there?
Yes, I'm here.
Please, Karina, come on. We want to hear you. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Hello, everyone. I feel really honored talking at this conference today. Also, mainly after all the powerful speeches that we had today, thanks to everyone that was talking before me already. I'm Karina. I'm currently doing my PhD studies in South Africa. And well, we talked already a bit about it today, like colonialism and the past of Africa. And I think my topic is also linking to that. I just want to talk a bit about the white savior mentality and Western volunteers and their impacts in Africa. So just out of fun this week, I started searching a bit online. I checked out a few volunteering agencies, and then it's always quite shocking what you find. You find volunteering agencies that want volunteers from the Western world to come to Africa, but then they're advertising it as, are you looking for an adventure or you want to change the world? And then they're looking for people, the requirements are, okay, you should be maybe 18 and yeah, you should be open to different cultures and whatnot. But we're not talking about, hey, you teaching children in those volunteering programs, you teaching them maybe about HIV and AIDS or other really like difficult topics. So and now we're sending like people that are like 18 or maybe a bit older to Africa, and they not educated for those issues, not even talking that sometimes they're not even speaking like the local language. They don't know anything about the local culture in the African countries. So we did actually some research in the Eastern Cape in South Africa in 2017 together with several later. So we discovered that those volunteers, despite that they don't have any education and any training in the jobs that they're working in Africa, they actually also, they don't get, most of the times they don't get any preparation, and they also don't have any supervision throughout their programs. So what we've been saying, we published 2 articles last year, that it is not that we don't need volunteers. In some areas, volunteers are needed, either from other African countries or maybe from some Western countries. So, but the problem is that we need to properly select those volunteers. And the problem is also that those volunteers, those young people coming from the Western world, it's not that they don't want to contribute something good, but it's really difficult if you don't have the experience and if you don't have the training. But then the problem is that they may be a bit naive and they just believe what those agencies promising them online. They're promising them, come to Africa, come to South Africa, Uganda, Kenya, wherever, and contribute to change in like 2 weeks or a week. Like, how is that even possible? It's not possible. So it is up to us, like the people in the field, the people knowing how change can actually take place in African countries. Also the people that are involved with those organizations that work with volunteers, that we only allow qualified people to volunteer in Africa, to only allow qualified people to take care and help vulnerable people in Africa. And it is also up to us to bring awareness about the topic and to stop this white savior mentality and those projects that just bring any person from the Western world to allow to come and help in African countries. So when it comes to volunteerism, it's really important that we have like a bottom-up approach. We need to know what is really needed in the communities and when is it needed. And then we look for volunteers that have exactly those kind of skills, and they're really trained and they have experience in those kind of fields. But then even if they have experience, let's say it's an educated teacher or someone, they still don't know anything about the culture. They might not speak the local language. So we still need some training and supervision that starts already before they even come to Africa, and then throughout the whole stay while they are here. So talking with them about the culture, about common problems in the specific country, about maybe gender issues, and also while they're here, talking with them about upcoming problems and just guiding them throughout the process. It's about Ubuntu, as we talked the whole day already today. It's we need to be stronger together, and we need to use the capacity that maybe we can get from volunteers, but then we need to maximize their time and support and only really allow like specific people to come and to help. Yeah, that's actually already from my side. Short and to the point, I hope. If you want any further information, you can also check out the articles we published last year, and you're also more than welcome to contact me if you want any further information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karina. Thank you. That was very powerful and warm. Now we move to the section of discussions. I know that a lot of people still have some questions. I will invite the chief speakers today, and that is the keynote speaker, the seed paper, the speaker, Dr. Glenn, then Nnimmo, and Professor Lumumba for a little discussion. A lot of ideas has been thrown. I've heard from Glenn. Glenn talked as if it's a big lift. It's not something we are going to do like trying to be practical. The practical slave is an eternal slave, he says. And Professor Lumumba even went to the extent of saying that, look, this issue of asking for money is not going to help. And a lot of people, even actually the section of questions is buzzing with such ideas. Some say no, some say yes. So I would like to invite Professor Lumumba, Dr. Glenn, and Nnimmo to discussion on these issues. And as the discussion go on, we can also invite some of those who are joining to unmute and join in the conversation. So, Professor Lumumba, what do we do? Some of the people, let's say, for example, the refugees, South Sudanese refugees here in Uganda. I remember one of the programs, we identified a problem there, and we saw that we were going for peace-building activities. And we identified a problem there. And the problem was that there is no electricity in the refugee camp because it's so far off. And then we came with these ideas, okay, let us do a pilot project, raise money, and put some power solar electricity so that we power health, power education, power small-scale business. Do you want us to fold shop? We don't need to look for donors for that. The government is not going to do it. Because even the natives, the host communities, also, they are having problems. But they use the same dispensaries. They use the same schools. And they go to the same market. So over to you. I'm not only calling on Dr. Professor Lumumba, I'm calling on Dr. Glenn and then Nnimmo. There are a lot of things that have been said. The discussion is open now. Thank you. Is Professor there? Is Professor Lumumba there? Hello? Dr. Glenn, you can come in if the revered professor is not there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. You hear me, right? Conferences do not solve problems. They bring the problem forward, and they can come with the ideas and the directions that we can take, but problems are solved in action. But they are important for awareness, and which is related to mental slavery. So this conference is very important, not because we have solved the problem of Africa, but we have come together and we have made a diagnosis like Professor Lumumba did. He made the diagnosis in a brilliant way of neo-colonialism now. And Nnimmo pointed to these critical issues we are facing here. This is a continent that has to deal with this environment, but deal with the problems. And so we have all these things on the table. And Professor Lumumba talked about Afro-pessimism. You know, I'm not a pessimist and I'm not an optimist, because both pessimism and optimism are forms of superstition. The one paints it really bad, the other. We have to be practical people, realist. And let me take the idea of a Latin American intellectual who said, let's leave pessimism for better days. So let's go on for what we have. And I think that I don't want to talk a lot because I brought my ideas already, but I think that the elements are there. We need a different democracy. We have to deal with politics. We need to have unity, and we need to bring people to the steering wheel. So I think this conference is bringing, and let me finish with that, a lot of elements that we have to work on, but it is a different ambiance that we have here than you used to have at these big conferences where they talk about business as usual. This is not business as usual, because business as usual will bring us to that as usual, to colonialism as usual. We have to break out of the system. And we know it will be difficult, but at least we have to refuse to be sitting ducks for elites and a system globally, because this goes further than Africa. It is about the whole survival of humanity. Humanity has been tampering dangerously with the exceptional conditions that made life possible on Earth ecologically. We don't care about peace. So we are creating the conditions for our exit. And this we is not the people, it's the 5%. The 95% want different. And I think this is a fantastic contribution from Africa to see how Africa will start to walk on its own feet. Let me make it that.
I agree.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much. I don't know, is Professor Lumumba there? Okay, as we wait for that, Ebemi Adebayo, can you please unmute your microphone and ask your question, or make the brief intervention? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, I'm Ebemi Adebayo. I'm a Nigerian, though I live in Turkey. You see, when we look at this problem, I am doing my PhD here in Turkey. I realized that the problem of the African society is majorly the colonization of the mind. And it is so bad that if we must solve this problem, because we have analyzed a lot of problems, we have seen where the problem is. The first and most important thing we must address is that we must go back to the African child. The mind of the African child has been so abused that the African child does not believe in Africa anymore. The parents themselves have become an instrument of colonizing the children. If you ask an African child about Africa, what do you think about Africa? The child sees only the bad part, because when the parents are in the house, they go to school, the only thing they hear is the odd part of Africa. Our educational setup has been so bastardized that when the child is growing up educationally, the child is not taught to think out of the box. The only thing the child learns is money, money, money. And when we grow up, as we are growing, the only thing we are thinking as we are pushing on into leadership position, we go into leadership all in the name to make money. I say this because I am an officer of the National Youth Service Corps. I am on study leave. I am saying this because I have worked in a youth setting where I discovered that if you meet 10 Nigerian youths who are fresh graduates from school, you say, what do you want? After service, what are you going to do? Instead of going to join politics to join them to eat the money. I came here to do a PhD. As you are talking with the African child, I've had opportunity to relate with Africans at large. I discovered that the core of the main problem is that we must go back to our roots. We must go back to our schools, inculcate the virtue of the African society, what the African society should be, what is expected. I wrote a paper recently where I was talking about poverty, a function of capitalism. You go to the streets of Africa, Africans are the one building the roads, but the money is not going to African society. Go to the case, when you look at the case of Egypt around 1954, when we're talking, if you are looking at what Nasser did, they were taking the money in the land of Egypt. They had a canal that the Egyptian built. 3% was just the tax that the Americans and the Britons were paying to Egypt. The people were suffering. This level of neo-colonialism has sitting deep into the society, that for the society to be able to address this issue, they must go back to the African child and work on the African child. And secondly, Africa has been further disorganized with religion. We are so religious that we have left the original thing. When you meet an African person, the basic thing that the person should do is say, God will do it. Even the one you should do, you say, God will do it. If we must address this thing, like Professor Lumumba just said, that how can you divorce politics out of the church? How can you divorce a society out of the church? But the church, the mosque, everybody, even if I see a brother who is a Christian is misbehaving, we have covered with the apron of religion, and we are condoning irresponsibility, and they have used it to colonize us such that we no longer think. And when we are coming up as children, we are not taught basic things. We are not thinking. I told somebody, I said, the African child, the African graduate must wake up to be thinking. Nobody pays for thinking. Thinking is free. Let us think Africa into a reality. Let us think Africa out of colonization. And let us think Africa out of imperialism.
Because you're sleeping while they're talking so much.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you for that intervention. We'll take interventions or questions from Ebemi, then from Ria, from Zephyr Waidera, and back to Joshua. Then after that, we will see where our key speakers, Professor Lumumba and Dr. Glenn, so that after that, the next scene is a little bit of summary, articulation, and then we find out. We promised to end this conference by 6. We're only adding 30 minutes on top of that. So please, we may not take more questions after this. So then, is all set there? All set? Can you unmute? I'm taking it as it's appearing here. All set and pra.
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Offset Gray. Hi. I'm a cultural lifestyle designer, and what I mostly specialize in is the people of us of African descent, is that we have lost our cultural heritage and that we really need to reconnect. We hear that all over. We do a lot of things with the youth, and they have very little knowledge of who they are and where they come from, which is essential. It is a gift to us. It's actually our birthright to know exactly where we come from and where we stand for. So because there's not a lot that is structurized or aligned in our narratives of the people of Africa, but also those of African descent, especially of those of the Ados family, we've decided to create an African calendar. And the African calendar is based on a primordial Kemetic tool and based on African wisdom and traditions. And it tells the story of Africa and her diaspora. And the reason for that being is that, of course, we now are aware that we are from Africa. We embrace that, but we are not fully able to accept it because we don't know the full storylines. Most of us, like I am from Suriname and partly Dominican, I know a lot about Suriname. That is the culture that I was brought up in, but I don't know anything about the rest. And what we do is we tend to claim our nationality instead of our origins. And we actually, we embrace that, or we had to learn to embrace that because we had to adjust, adapt, and of course, to sustain in this environmental that we are living in, which is a dominating culture, and we are all subcultures to dominating cultures. So we've created this African calendar, which actually tells our story from the basics. It tells our story, it gives us back our cultural heritage. It shares traditions of Africa. It shares symbols of Africa. It shares the stories, mythology, and even the ancient gods and goddesses that we used to have from Kemet. The calendar is coming out in 2022. And I would like to invite you to join us and take a look on our website. It's not fully done yet. We're still in construction. But if you have any feedback, please connect with us because we want to have it as full as possible can be, to exchange as much stories behind us as people of African descent, but also behind the stories of Africa, so we can learn more about each other and be able to accept those that reflect us and even ourselves.
Thank you very
for
much.
giving me the time.
Thank you very much. And now I invite Zafir Wadira. Is she there? Zafir? Yeah, come on.
Hello. Yes, I'm here. So thank you for the opportunity. My name is Zephyr. I'm from Kenya, and I really enjoyed being part of this discussion. So I had a comment and a question. So I could hear a lot, and I've been very inspired from all the keynote speakers who've had a chance to talk, and there really is hope for Africa. As a young person, I am very inspired to really see and be a part of this change. But then, and I know this question was also asked in the chat, we have had an amazing discussion today, but I'm looking at it from an individual, just as an individual, as a youth. What would be the action point I would almost carry out of this conference and the discussion we have had? Because we have addressed the problems, we have looked at where we are as a country, as a continent at large, I mean. So my comment on it would be, I feel like there has been a gap in a while in the educational system. And I'm not against it. I am a firm believer of everyone being properly educated and having, and going all the way to the master's and PhD level. But I'm more concerned about the education that happens outside. So in this case, I came to know of basic financial principles or the importance of agriculture a lot later on. But I spent a lot of time growing up feeling like that wasn't as important, or, you know, things that are more based in my country that important. I remember staying for a while hoping I'd move to a different country abroad, just either for education or just to stay there, just because that looked more lucrative. So my comment would be, I feel like there are a lot of gaps on the civic education or education that's going out to the public about the continent and about our rights, about financial management. And I would like to ask, do we, for the people who are here and stakeholders in these spaces, are there any pointers or are there any steps you're going to take after this conference to ensure that this actually gets to the people it needs to get to? And if the youth are needed, then how can we then come in and help in doing that? Yes, that is my
Thank
question.
you very much, Waidera, Zafir Waidera. Please, Ria Radwick, are you there? You are raising your hand here.
Yes, I'm here.
Briefly.
Hi, nice to be part of this conference. I'm Ria Radwick from IDFA, I do it for Africa. I'm calling from China right now. And the one thing that from here within the diaspora, the African diaspora, what I've noticed is everybody's trying to get a PhD, a master, and a bachelor here at university in lots of different fields. But what I feel is, are we really up to that? Don't we need more skills? Because many of them, when they go back, they see that there is more need for skills because we're still building up. There is still more needs for production, for producing, and for setting up factories. And coming from China, they have lots of opportunities to do so. They start maybe small scale, but they're doing it. So I think maybe if the youth can be encouraged and maybe funded or sponsored in starting up this industrialization in Africa, I think this will be, for the youth, a big start, if they can start with that. Because, I mean, how many doctors can we have? How many engineers can we have if the lower section of the community is not there to support it because they're not skilled? So I think maybe for the continent, it would be more important to have more skilled workers as highly educated university graduates. But that is just my view on this, being in China. The other thing that I want to ask, is there such possibilities and how can that happen? Because the youth here, we have many discussions, many groups, but there's always these two key points I'm seeing is missing. One, sponsorship, funding, and IDs. Is there a way in tapping into such? Is there something like that? Are there organizations who are supporting this kind of youth?
Okay, thank you very much, Radwick. That was a very important contribution. I'm inviting Anke Weishit. Are you there, Anke? Unmute. And yes.
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Anke Weisheit. I'm originally from Germany and I'm in Uganda for the last 20 years. I'm a co-founder of Pharmaceutical Biotechnology and Traditional Medicine Center. I like to contribute to this conference that we need practical action in skills development, like the former speaker just said. And practical action is actually establishing centers which are Afro-centered and for utilizing the local knowledge systems which are available. In the moment, we're doing it in the health sector, health, nutrition, and cosmetic. But it has to be reached out to agriculture. For example, we are saying Western erodation in culture, in religion. Let me also emphasize on agriculture. And when you see the local indigenous species of plants and animals, which are good in food security because they're locally adapted, are slowly taken away by introducing seeds and animals which are hybrid, and some of them cannot be multiplied locally. The farmer is getting dependent on buying the seed. The so-called green revolution is also not tapping on local knowledge. Education, as you said, starts with the child. In a primary school education, I can see little touch to the African needs of skill sets, like home garden, like different skill sets. Most of them are copied from the international school curriculum. So First, we need to start on curriculum change and also building centers of excellence in Africa on revitalizing indigenous knowledge, indigenous science, and develop it ahead. Look at China. The traditional medicine sector is very highly developed up to university. There are universities of traditional medicine in China. In Germany, there are institutions, there are training institutions for traditional healers. They are there for years. But in Uganda, for example, is not yet formalized. So our center is the starting point of such activities. So we need these centers of promoting African way of doing things, to network them together, to share beyond the conference, to have a kind of a foundation, an African network of institutions who work on the Pan-African developing and revitalizing African development from within. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Joshua, please, briefly, before I allow our key speakers to round up this conference, and then we make a summary and we go. Joshua, are you there?
Thank you. Thank you very much. The previous speakers have kind of preempted my thoughts, but just to re-echo them, it was all about how to move forward, because sometimes we attend conferences and we get inspired. After that inspiration, it just becomes another conference, and then you wait for another conference. So, but how can we get to the real action plans? Like, how can we go beyond just a conference and have like some tangible things that we can work on? In 2019, I attended a conference that was organized by African Union mission in the United States. That was in Washington, D.C. And the former ambassador, that's Her Excellency Arikana, she mentioned something that was so important. She said, African Union is looking at the Africans who are in diaspora. And they believe that they are the ones that are going to drive the economic transformation of the African continent. But since that discussion, to me, I believe it became also another conference we attended, because after that, there was no action plan that going forward, how do we work with the Africans in diaspora? So my brothers and sisters who are in this conference right now, it gets back to you. Most of the time we go abroad and we study, we get the exposure, you get the good skills, but then in the end, you look at these big salaries that are being offered in the United States, in Europe, and then you feel like, why would I leave these big salaries and go back to Africa? Well, if you make such a decision that you're going to work from those countries, how can you use your influence when you're there? Like, that's an influence that you already have. How can you influence things in Africa here? How can you help your brothers and sisters who have remained behind? Because not everyone is going to get the kind of exposure you're getting. Not everyone is going to get those kind of skills you've gained. But then how can we work together that we help each other? We are not going to wait for another white man to come and help us, but we can rely on our brothers and sisters who are already learned from abroad, who have better skills, probably better than ours, who are still in the continent. So it's my plea to everyone on this conference today. Let's have some action plan. Maybe after this conference, can we have a follow-up email? Can we have a way forward that what do we need to begin working on, so that we don't wait for another conference and we inspire each other and we wait for another conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Joshua. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Glenn, Dr. Lumumba. I invited him earlier on. I don't know whether he's back there. And Nnimmo, I don't know whether he's lying. Dr. Glenn, please come in.
Yes. What is the blueprint and what can I do? People often ask, which are the two wrong questions. Let me quote a nice poet. He says, "Wanderer, there is no road. You make the road as you go. Our footsteps pave the road, and when we stop to look back, we see the path that our feet will never travel again." So the pilgrimage is the road. The alternatives are parts of the road. So don't look for a blueprint, because we will have hurdles that we even cannot dream about. What we need is a project to take command of our destiny, and we will deal with the hurdles. So people who work at blueprints are in the wrong track. Second thing is, what can I do? Nothing. Unless the I becomes a we. That is the big thing. We is the first word of my book and the last word of my book. The I should become a we. At that moment, the force starts to grow. If the I stays an I, it is very nice and good, nothing will happen. And that is the Ubuntu idea, basically, which is powerful. Ubuntu is not an African thing. It's a global thing of humanity. These are the nice global philosophies that were put aside, but they should be at the center. So when the I becomes the we have the beginning of the problem, because the solution is closer than you can ever dream if the solution is we. So let me be short, because so many things have been said and so beautiful things have been brought forward. And this conference is not the end of nothing. If it's not the beginning of something, it was nice, but it was not what it should be. So I don't know what will come out of it and what will come, but something will happen. Maybe we'll have another one, better organized or better thought. But at this moment, the more I was looking to make my last statement, I was looking when it's okay, this world is in problems, because I'm looking at the whole world. It took me 30 years of sleepless nights and work because of a big issue we have. And I said, listen, what are the forces that will bring the change? I started to say, okay, listen, if you want to change, try first within the system. If you have it, fine. If you don't have it, you have to go out of it. So I looked at the system exhaustively. Politics, conclusion, no. Science, like it is, no. Religion, like it is, no. And NGOs, like they are, no. They have to reform. NGOs have to become democratic organizations, not the property of a couple of persons. Otherwise, they will not. Religion should be the religion, the original religion with the message, not the power structure of human being. Go back to the message of religion. And science should be the science for development. So basically, I was looking at that. What then is the force? The only force I could identify is what I call the moral reserves of humanity. That is the majority of humanity. Not organized, marginalized, and problem. And if we manage to bring together the moral reverse of humanity, one day we can make a rescue our future movement with them as the basis. How it will take time, but this kind of conference can help to do that. So I'm happy and glad to this conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Glenn. Thank you very much. I don't know whether Dr. Lumumba is still with us. Professor Lumumba? Okay. As we planned it, we wanted to do a little bit of the conference highlights. And I would like to invite Philip Oduo Carson. He's a senior lecturer at Uganda Christian University, Kampala, to come and give us a little bit of the summary and recommendations of this conference that has been that he has articulated before we close the conference practically. Like I said, in the next 10 minutes, we should be over. It should be over. Thank you very much. Philip, welcome.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you for everyone who is viewing us from wherever you are. Our fellow Africans in Uganda, East Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Africa in the diaspora, and all our good friends in all the countries in the world. Today is a day when we are communicating to the world about the interests of Africa. But most importantly, we want to make a point that it is our right as Africans to take the command of our destiny. Indeed, a lot of useful information has been communicated. We have enjoyed every bit of the conversation. Interestingly, we have enjoyed the useful point of direction that we get from the different speakers. Interesting contributions we have received from the different brothers and sisters who have, poured out their experiences of how much they would want Africa to change for the good, but also we have deliberated on the dilemmas that we see. I'm very sure some of us are even victims of the crisis that Africa is facing. But today we want to kick the ball to start the initiative of how we can change or turn things around. I'm not going to go over everything that you've talked about, but I just want to highlight a summary of a few of those issues that we've talked about. Most importantly, to be able to give us a sense of direction of what would we see as an area that we should work on as recommendations, but also we could identify them as intervention areas, areas where we shall need actions. Ian, now I want to start by mentioning our point of focus. Where is our moral reserve? This conference draws our attention to the Africa's moral reserve. We are identifying that our moral reserve lies in the African soul. We can do a lot with what lies within us. Glenn pointed it out clearly that the one thing that cannot be taken away from us is the moral reserve, the resourcefulness that we have within us. I can tell you that you can identify yourselves with all the potentials that you have, and I'm very sure those are the things you cannot lose. Even if someone wanted to take them away from you, they cannot get it. That is the inbuilt potential within each one of us. So this conference is encouraging us to rediscover ourselves and exploit those potentials so we can cause change in our countries that we live in our societies, and make a point to the West that we can do things in the interest of Africa. Now, this conference draws attention to the impact of colonialism. When I was following the threads of the chats, one of the audience, the participant, mentioned that why should we reflect on the past? We actually need to reflect on the past because we have to know where we came from so we can know where we want to go. So the problems that we are facing today has a root, and it's very important for us to know the root. We know the root and we know what we want. Okay? Lumumba mentioned something that is very interesting, that neocolonialism exists, and it is the current face of foreign dominance. And we need to get a way of controlling that circumstance and create a way forward for Africans. It is also important, of course, for us to know that the West is actually extending their achievements to Africans so we can uplift ourselves to the Western standards. Now, that may be a diversion. We instead need to have Africans take the central seat. We have to take the seat on the steering so we can lead. Glenn put it clearly that we need to take the front seat. We need to take the front seat and have the West take the back seat so that we can control and not have the West control. And I think that is an important point for us to take note of. Okay? Also, discussions around the issue that we're talking about points that the Western perception of Africa's development is actually not the development Africans would want. Instead, it is the envelopment of Africa. We are enclosed in what we can describe as a bucket. We cannot get ourselves to the rest of the world and control our interests from the outside. So we are controlled within our own context. And so we as Africans need to get out from our dockets with our own capacities to change the way we want to live. That point was made very clear. Our discussions draws attention to democracy. The understanding of democracy as we know it seems not to be the kind of democracy that we want. And Glenn pointed it out clearly that, and other contributions that came through, that we need the Ubuntu spirit to be strengthened. We need to identify and uphold the Ubuntu spirit and identify ourselves with it. We need that Ubuntu-based spirit or kind of democracy that helps us to discover our interests and work to pursue the African-led interest. not the foreign or Western-led interest through the democratic principle. Also, we also need to understand how Africa is identified and represented in the world through some institutions. And we identified the African Union as a very focal institution here. Unfortunately, questions, of course, arise as to how African Union can really represent Africa within the global space. Glenn mentioned something very important, that we need to focus on evolution rather than revolution. When Lumumba was giving his speech, he pointed out a number of crises that we're having or witnessing in Africa, mentioning countries like DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, talking about the African Central Republic, the crisis and the insecurity that is being experienced in Western Africa, even including Africa, Uganda, by the way. A lot of insecurities are being seen. Now, we are being encouraged that we need to focus on changing. To evolve is to change our lifestyle, change our situations or the circumstance for the good, but not to revolt. To revolt is violence. It has a lot of negative implications. So our focus is to evolve and cause change, most importantly, positive change. Something very important that we could probably digest and internalize that came out of this conference. Africa is a resourceful and rich continent. We have to work hard to turn this rich continent into a rich continent that we know. We know that Africa is a rich continent, but we need to turn it into the rich continent that the world is going to recognize. Okay? We need to build the African negotiating mechanism, and that means we need to have an institution that can help us negotiate with the rest of the world. One of the presenters pointed out the African Union. We cannot, for example, have Uganda go into the international space to negotiate as Uganda, for example. We could speak through the African Union as a regional bloc. Okay? Now, just an extract, a summary of recommendations or areas of action that you can consider in summary. 1, decolonization of the mental slavery. A lot has been talked about that. I don't need to explain it. We need to change our mindset. We need to have a mental shift. We need to have a mental shift and rediscover ourselves as Africans and speak about our realities and work in relation to the realities of Africa. We need to stop the blame game, but act. Okay? We also need to focus on moving away from the modern economic system of the West. We should not adopt the Western economic system, but rather work to generate or create the African economic system. Connie was emphasizing, let's get away or run away from the monetary systems that the West has created. We talk about foreign aid, we talk about donations, we talk about the loans that we get from IMF, the International Monetary Fund. We talk about the World Bank and how it is supporting Africa and this development. The question will be, how far is this taking us? Is it building the African capacity, or it is crippling and squeezing the life out of the Africans? You get it? I'm very sure some of you even have no idea how the borrowed money works. You only read about them in the papers and you see this amount in dollars has been borrowed, or the World Bank has given Uganda some amount of money. And if you try to look for how did this money work, how did it work, you may not find it. Okay? So Connie is emphasizing, can we change the monetary system? Can we have the African currency that will trade against other currencies strongly? That is something that we need to ponder about. We need to mobilize our own potentials, build the skills of Africans so we can initiate and create our own stories, bring about our own developments. It's very interesting how the pandemic, the COVID-19, has shaped the world today. And we are hearing of different corners of the world coming up with different vaccines. The question is, can Uganda, can Kenya, can Nigeria come up with its own vaccine? Is it possible? Now that is the question that this conference is trying to ask. If the West can come up with a vaccine, and interestingly, we are waiting for the same vaccines to come, so we can be, can't we do our own and come up with a vaccine? Just a quick one. Tanzania, the president of Tanzania was quoted warning Tanzanians from taking the COVID-19 vaccines. He issued a warning, and it is recorded that they are actually, Tanzania is having its local hubs undergoing clinical investigation, clinical, tests. The idea behind is that they have their own mechanism of how they want to handle COVID-19. Okay? Someone will say that probably they are taking a big risk. But who is not taking a risk? We don't have to fear, because fear is the greatest disappointment you can ever want to lean on. Solidarity. Solidarity is very important, so we need to have that common voice if we are to create change. Okay? Lastly, it's very important for us to focus on how we are going to fight corruption. It is known that one of the greatest diseases for Africa is corruption. One of the members, I picked this from one of the chat that a member contributed, that we need to work against corruption by all means, and this involves us, it involves our leaders in a broader sense. So basically this is a summary. A lot more has been shared. Everyone has been taking note of issues. I cannot exhaust them. I cannot actually even say much, but this is what we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phillips. We are rounding up now. I want to thank all the audience, beautiful audience. As we have heard, it's not all bad news. It's not all bad news. A lot of points have come out so much. Our democracy, we need to evolve a new one. We need to really think deep. I love the way Professor Lumumba touched that issue. He said, I don't have the answer. We don't. But a lot of good news is already happening in Africa. The boundaries are being renegotiated in some places. We have South Sudan now. And remember also that the common international passport, so that we don't have to be crossing the borders from one place to the other. We have to stop and everything. This is our timelines. And most importantly, and actually I was very happy reading about this in the last encyclical of the Pope, Fratelli Tutti, where he talked about forcing individual nations to go to negotiate trade agreements on their own. The question that we have to ask and work for and try to lobby is to make sure that how many years will it take Africa so that Africa will start negotiating trade negotiations en bulk as one voice. Unless that happens, our economy will not really make the leap that is expecting. I want to thank all the contributors in this virtual conference, especially Francis Sekate and Cees, who really brought everybody together, and our key speaker, Dr. Glenn, Professor Lumumba. Also, I want to thank Bassey for his input in the conference. You have all been very wonderful, good audience. Imagine when we announced this conference already, there are some of the universities, I think Oxford is already negotiating to publish the outcome of this conference. And you heard our brother talking about them trying to do the same thing in Latin America. The information that not only Africa is colonized and suffering from problems of colonialism is there. So then, let us understand that this conference is a starting point. Each person, from where we are, in what we do, this mental colonization, this mental liberation has to start with me. Thank you very much. I hope we organize another conference like this and call you. Thank you.